Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the St. Helena Planning Commission for June 16th, 2005, and ask Commissioner Heil to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If we could have roll call, please.
Commissioner Heil,
Present.
Manette,
Here.
Sweeney,
Here.
Vice Chair Kistner,
Here.
Chairperson Parker.
Present. Moving on to the public forum, this is an opportunity for the public to address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on tonight's agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the Commission may not engage in discussion nor take actions on items not described on the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. I also do want to just say that we do have a full agenda tonight, so if you could keep comments thoughtful and concise, that would be most appreciative. We also do have Matt's family here for a presentation at the end of public forum, so just be aware that we have a young family that is here this evening. Would anyone like to speak at public forum? All right, seeing none, I'd like to get into the presentation that we have for Commissioner Heil. We have a few things for you.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to, we have our city manager here.
Odd being on this end. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Jennifer Phillips. I'm the city manager here in St. Helena. I've been here just about a year now. And these are things that I would usually say are a real pleasure for me to acknowledge the work of those who contribute their time to our community, to move our community forward and make it every day a better place for our entire community to be. This I do with very mixed emotions, as Matthew's been very dedicated and I think has been a real contributing member to our planning commission. And so I have a plaque, a certificate of appreciation. It's in recognition of your outstanding service, dedication, and lasting contributions to the St. Helena Planning Commission. And you served from January 2011 to July 2015. So it is our pleasure. Our staff, the planning staff, you've seen us go through a lot of changes. You've been a leader for us in helping me understand the community, understand the wishes of the residents, helping new staff come in and offering your expertise and helping the Planning Commission over the past years. So I want to thank you very much for your service. I know your fellow commissioners feel as well, and staff is very grateful. You will be very missed, and we wish you and your family there, you and your lovely family, all the best. I'll be terribly disappointed if you become a Steeler fan.
Never.
No chance. They're Eagles fans where we are.
All right. So we wish you the very best. So if I can present this to you.
We also have a few things for Commissioner Heil. Commissioner Sweeney found an old picture from Old Town St. Helena and had it framed. And St. Helena is a better place because of your thoughtful service. And this is Main Street in St. Helena under a blanket of snow circa 1907. So this is for you.
And we also have a gift here, Matthew, of something that's a little more recent. These are done by local artists. There are three of them. One died last year, Ava Wilson, Kate Scupney, and Midge Burns. And they're a gift to us because we expect to hear from you on these.
It's definitely an
Thank you
Indian.
very much for your leadership the past 4 years. I've really enjoyed working with you, Matt.
Thank you, Grace.
And I just wanted to also just say that I've known Matt since I was 7 or 8 years old, and he was giving me money to leave him alone at Lucas Valletta's house. And, you know, his service started then in the community and on through as ASB president of St. Helena High School, and then coming back here with his family. And it's just been just a pleasure to work with you. And we joined at the same time, and so it's kind of very bittersweet. So, but I do wish you and your lovely family, and we love Jen and all your kids, just the best. And, you know, we know you'll be back. I guess that's kind of why we're a little okay with it. We know that, you know, this is just for a phase of your life, a chapter. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I want to say that I've known Matt since he was how old? 8. I was
Probably 4 or 5.
4 or 5. I was playing piano for the local ballet teacher, and Matt was in the class. So he was a great dancer, and he's a great athlete, and they go together. And you're an artist. Through and through, I learned so much from you when I first came on the commission. You were the chair, and you spent a lot of time with me. I so appreciate it. You are just amazingly bright, and you know, I expect you to come back someday and be mayor of St. Helena.
Thank you very much, Bobby. Thank you all so much. Can't tell you what it means to me to have your support, and you know, makes it all so worth it. You know, our city has challenges and has had challenges ever since I first joined the commission back in 2011, and we'll continue to have challenges moving forward. But I think it's so important that we work together and that we help each other through these challenges. And I think great days and great things are still ahead for St. Helena. And you know, this is such a touching, you know, such touching gifts. You know, especially the history of St. Helena. You know, the 1907. You know, the more you read about St. Helena, the more you realize it's still the same. You know, tourism, destination, worldwide destination. We have such an incredible city, and we have such a treasure. And I think so many of you feel so passionate about it. And I know that everybody here, you know, my fellow commissioners have worked so hard to try and strike a balance to preserve it, and at the same time to make sure it flourishes and to provide for its, you know, so it may thrive into the future. So, at any rate, I'm really moved. Thank you all so much, Tracy.
We're going to miss you.
And I guess and the gazebo too. I guess I've got my
There's four different
pictures, different pictures. Oh, perfect.
yeah.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to be able to leave them. I'm going to have to pin them up
We expect
in my new office.
a blow by blow, one of those a month. What I'm thinking too is that I'm really happy for you. Philly is historically so amazing, going
Yep.
back way further, you know, going way back. And I know you're interested in history, and I know you're going to just enjoy that aspect of it.
Thank you. Well, we're returning to our roots. Jen and I were married in Philadelphia, right across at the cathedral in Center City, and then we had our wedding reception right across from Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. So we're going to try and steep these kids in history as well, Lydia, Alexandra, and Max. And I'd like to thank my wife and my kids for letting me take these Tuesday nights and all the extra studying and meeting with people that have happened over the last 5 years. Thank you so much to my family. So thank you. So let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
Appreciate it, everybody.
Moving on to the consent items, we have approval of the minutes. We do have a new set of minutes. I don't know if everyone saw that with corrections.
Yes, I did see that.
Does anyone else have any edits?
Is the public going to be asked if they want to pull anything on the consent?
I'm actually going to do them one by one so we don't make mistakes anymore, so I'm just doing the minutes right now. Do we have a motion?
I did see an error, but I think it's been corrected from these new minutes, from what I can tell. So I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Do we want to wait to do roll call, Cindy, at the end, or just do
No,
it now?
we'll
Okay.
do a separate motion.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Next on the consent items, we have PL 15-027. Does anyone have any comments? Would they like to pull it?
Yes, I would like to pull it.
You would like to
If
pull
no
it?
one else is.
All right. Can we have a minor staff report on that then?
The project before the commission on consent is located at 1800 Spring Mountain Court. It's a design review exemption for a carport. The project is accessed, the carport's accessed off an alley to the rear of the property. The original approval was for a remodel and expansion, a design review exemption. That was granted, however, the structure was determined to not be sound. The original home was demolished and reconstructed through a demolition and design review project. However, that proposal or approval only included a one-car carport with a parking space adjacent. also accessed off the rear alley. The applicant has proposed to construct a 2-car carport, and that is the reason for the application being brought before the commission.
And Bobby, what's your question of staff?
Well, I just wondered if, since the additional, it was a 1-car garage, now it's a 2-car garage, since that addition changed the setback even, more than it was already, I was just wondering if that didn't need a variance, or I understand that the first one didn't, but I didn't know what the rest of the commission might think about that too, so I just thought I'd bring that up.
The project as designed and proposed meets the setback requirements of the district.
I think that's because the carport, right, is an occupied space, so it can
That's
be
correct.
within, it
If
can
it's
be within the
unplumbed,
setback.
unoccupied.
Yeah, so 3-foot setback is permitted for an accessory structure that's not occupied. That's exactly right. And so they're proposing 3 foot off the alley and 5 foot off of the side property line.
If there's no public, objection, then I'm fine, but I would like to hear. I'm not, is this on or not? I'm sorry, this isn't working.
But it's not.
It's not working.
Are there-
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I would like, if there's no public pushback on this change, can you still not hear?
Oh, it's turning up.
Is it nothing? Is it better now? Oh, okay. So oh, you
Okay,
did. All right.
you
So I would like to hear
okay,
public comment.
Once staff is finished answering the questions, I'll open up public comment. Bobby, are you satisfied with?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to hear from the public before voting on this.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for staff at this time? All right. I'd like to open up public comment on this item.
I emailed this gentleman here to set up an appointment for me, and that's why I was a little confused. I made up 5 packets. I don't know who.
You can hand them to Aaron.
Yeah, let's take one.
And then if you could also identify yourself.
I will.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Ron Baker. My family and I have owned 2 adjoining properties in the back of the project since 1942. The 2 addresses are 1541 and 1521 Elmhurst. During the last 18 months, our neighborhood has been vastly impacted by the construction project at 1800 Spring Mountain Court. First, there was an approximate 80-foot redwood tree removed without a permit. Secondly, remodeling began in a matter of days. The house was demolished without the proper permit. Next, approximately a month of rebuilding went on without being authorized by you, the Planning Commission. The project was supposed to be the same footprint as the old, but the garage was enlarged and converted to living space, thus creating the problem of off-street parking that we are addressing tonight. Just recently, a 2-car carport was constructed at the rear of the site without the necessary permit or proper setbacks. It is clearly shown under the permitted guidelines of St. Helena for medium-density residential that a 20-foot setback is necessary for a carport. Please refer to the handout. And I put about 4 pages together there, and I'm going to run through it quickly because I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. On page 2, it just merely shows that carports, workshops, pool houses, gazebos, garages, and etc. are involved in this particular requirement. At the bottom of page 3, it says that a carport must comply with all building setbacks. On page 5, I'll read it. Standard for driveways and access drives. Residential driveways. A residential driveway provides direct vehicle access from a public street or a private street developed to city standards to the required parking for an individual dwelling unit. That portion which connects a residential driveway to the street is a driveway approach and is typically located in a right-of-way. A residential driveway shall have a minimum length of 24 feet when you have a pivotal garage door, or 20 feet when you have a roll-up or carport.
I'm sorry if you could wrap up your
Pardon?
comment. We're sticking with the 3 minutes.
That's real difficult because I have the real binding information to
Well,
come.
if you want to wrap it up, that's fine.
Okay, I
but-
will. I put in there 3 photos. One is of the carport that was built and tore down. The second one shows another structure being built in the backyard, and I don't know what that is. Doesn't look like it has setbacks either. Notice the illegal fence, which is 9 feet high in that second picture. The third shows the infamous alley with their fence and large sliding gate on the right and my property line on the left. Notice how their gate conveniently lines up with my driveway, and they have already been using it for a turnaround. The practice will not be allowed to continue. They are not to encroach on my land to try to get out of their driveway. Also note the manhole in the foreground of the third picture. And I'll wrap it up. In closing, the 2-car carport request should be denied or postponed until the following issues are addressed. 1, a new set of plans showing the proper setbacks for medium-density residents as shown in your St. Helena guideline. And they recommend 20 feet in the back, 20 feet in the front, and 10 on the side. 2, total structure area is not to exceed 45% of the lot. This thing is growing daily there. The whole backyard, I looked through the cracks of the fence yesterday, and the backyard is totally full of some kind of structure. 3, demonstrate the ability to park 2 cars off of the alley and maneuver them in and out without encroaching on other people's property, mine in particular. 4, determine who owns the alley and set rules as to its use. I have a deed granted in 1942 that shows it as part of my property. Also, we have been paying taxes on this ground for 73 years. If the land doesn't belong to me, then I'd like a credit for them taxes. The manhole that I referred to is going to get interesting. Is either a sanitary sewer or a storm drain. And the line enters this property at that point and runs through an easement in the area of the proposed carport and on into the cul-de-sac in front of their house. There is also another easement on the other side of their property, which is a main water line. 6, something needs to be done with the illegal 9-foot fence. We are not in the habit of having bull fences. 7, the alley surface has been damaged by tractors, trucks, and 18 months of construction, to a point that it should be repaved the entire length of their property. I don't care who repaves it, somebody needs to repave it. And lastly, I would like to share a short phrase that was used in this here building right across the hallway by the vice principal back in 1958.
If you could speak into the microphone, sir, that would be helpful so people at home can hear.
Yeah. Vice Principal Debley, who was in charge of tardies and attendance and discipline, had a little saying that I think fits this project nicely. He used to tell us, if you fool me once, shame on me. But if you fool me twice, shame on you. Thank you and good night.
I'm going to turn this over to staff.
Pardon?
I'm going to turn this over to staff.
So I met with Mr. Baker yesterday. He brought in some of the issues that he mentioned. He brought up the fact that there's questions as to the ownership of the alley. I pulled the assessor maps. There is no separate parcel for the alley crossing his property or the adjoining property to the northeast. However, he did indicate that this parcel had been accessed utilizing that alley for a number of years. I think you said since the 50s, 40s. So essentially, that gets into prescriptive rights. But from staff's perspective and the department's perspective, if the alleyway was utilized to access the applicant's parcel, this is continuing to utilize that existing established right to access. There is no zoning code reference to prescriptive rights. It's a civil matter. It's decided by essentially courts and interacting between the properties. Also, he did bring up the code sections in our meeting, and I was not, we didn't have an appointment, so I hadn't had any time to do any research on the code. I had not had the time to, in our brief discussion, to find the code section that references the 3-foot setbacks. However, I have done so since then. And under Chapter 17, which is for 17116 for accessory building structures, dwellings, and uses, specifically item C3, a minimum 3-foot distance shall be provided from the property line to the accessory building or structure. So essentially, the allowance for the structure has been identified. The location of the carport has been approved through previous Planning Commission action approving the design review of a single-car carport. The applicant has now proposed to expand that to a 2-car carport. However, should the Planning Commission deny this application, the applicant still has an approval for a single-car carport with a parking space adjacent to it. Essentially, access from the alley, allowing 2 cars to park in the exact same location as being proposed. The only difference from a staff perspective is that the structure is being expanded to cover a second car. There are 2 arbor structures adjacent to the swimming pool, as he identified as accessory structures. Both of those were included in the previous Planning Commission approval, approving the design review modifications to the structure. I have heard numerous discussions regarding the process this project went through. The applicants have contended there were verbal approvals granted for the demolition. The previous staff report that was brought before the commission identified there was a discrepancy or a disagreement between staff and the applicants. However, at this point, the department feels that that is somewhat irrelevant given the past approvals by the Planning Commission, the issuance of the building permit, the construction in conformance with those approvals have all been addressed. Given the contention with this application, staff did notice the neighborhood a 300-foot radius, which is not required for an exemption. However, staff felt it was important to bring all concerned parties into this process. The carport was illegally constructed as a 2-car carport, which is correct, as Mr. Baker identified. However, staff required that the applicants demolish that structure, which they did, and go through this process requesting approvals from the Planning Commission.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions of staff? And I am going to keep the public comment is still open. I just wanted staff to clarify.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Does the second, additional carport, if you will, infringe further into the setback, or is it away from the setback? Is it along the same line from the property line?
The closest corner to the rear property line is the 3-foot is a 3-foot setback, and that that was previously approved. So
it's not going further
exactly
into the setback.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Can you explain the difference between the 17.116 and 17.124.070? The code that's in this right here. Which is, they seem to contradict each other. I don't understand.
So 17.124.070 is specific to standards for driveway and access drives?
Well, it's the one that talks about the carports needing the 20 feet. It's in the handout.
I think Bobby's referring to what the public speaker brought forward.
Yes, I'm referring to the handout that we received from the gentleman who just spoke.
I didn't get a copy of the handout. Just bear with me for a
of
moment.
course.
Sorry.
If I may, through staff, I believe so under 17.124.030, which the gentleman has highlighted for us, 1 residential, it says, 1 and 2 family dwelling units, 2 spaces for each dwelling unit, one of which shall be contained within a garage or carport, which complies with all building, yard, and or setback. So I think that and or is crucial with regards to the setback for a carport, because it's going to be different than a setback from an occupied structure, such as a building. I mean, it has to comply with the building and yard, codes. But the setback requirement for an unoccupied carport is 3 feet. It's an accessory structure as governed by the other section that, that Mr. Hausch, cited from, which is section 116. So this is under medium density residential. So it's taking that accessory structure and it's saying, okay, the accessory structure, has to conform to the setback for an accessory structure, and that depends on what the accessory structure is. In the case of a carport, it's an unoccupied space. It's within 3 feet, and we've heard
It
from.
includes carport in the list of accessory.
I think that's why it says and or instead of just and setback requirements.
That's the only one that the or is referring to, or I'm just a little.
It's a little clumsily worded. I mean, and certainly we didn't write the code. This is existing code, but
That's staff's interpretation as well.
So this is under residential A1. So 1 and 2 family dwellings, 2 spaces, one of which may be contained within a garage or carport which complies with
no,
all
I think
building
it's
yard-
sorry. One of which shall be contained.
Shall
I
be,
mean,
yeah, that's correct. With all building yard and or setback requirements. So there's that. And then separate issue is 124070, which is standards for driveways and access drives. There is no driveway associated with this element because of the location of the carport. And typically, driveway delineations are set up because you have to have a certain distance off of the public right-of-way to allow a car to park completely on a property. And so you need very specific driveway links if it's accessing a parking space, because otherwise the car would be half on the property and half in the right-of-way.
Okay, thank you. I hear your explanation. Makes sense.
Okay. And Director Hausch, I have a question. So can you clarify what you were saying specifically as it relates to the alley? And just so that I better understand, is our public speaker saying that there was question on owning the alley? He believes he owns the alley. The parcel map shows otherwise, perhaps.
No, the parcel map shows that he owns the alley. The alley is not a
Okay.
separate parcel when it crosses his property.
Okay, so if you can better then clarify where the applicant is driving across the speaker's land, is that in fact required to get into this carport?
It's very much required to get into the carport. I have a graphic. It's not the clearest.
Shows on here, Tracy.
See if we can bring it up. But essentially, there is a separate alley parcel accessing off of a side street. I think Elmhurst.
It has changed. Over the years, it's always been Elmhurst, but it's Elmhurst.
Sir, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go to the podium.
If you could come up and speak in the microphone.
The address and everything is related to Elmhurst Avenue. When they developed that subdivision that this project is in, the city somehow allowed them not to put a second lane in. So we were always stuck with a one-lane road called Elmhurst. Then it got changed to Elmhurst Extension. People started calling it that, and now it's the infamous alley. The thing that I want worked out if I end up being the legal owner of that property is they are going to get a minimal amount of that alley to get in and out of their parcel, period. They do not have control over the whole alley. And they've already attempted, evidently, because they have already installed a man gate at the far end of the alley, so they're going to be whatever, walking and everything down that alley, and that's not going to happen.
So here's a graphic. This is the subject parcel, and here's Mr. Baker's home. So interestingly, the alley from here to here is its separate parcel. It's its own. It's identified as an alley parcel. Once it gets to this lot, there is no more. It's not separated anymore, and it's hard to see the property lines. You can kind of see it here, but that property line does not continue. So it's not a separate defined parcel here, or as it crosses Mr. Baker's property. However, Mr. Baker indicated to me in our meeting that the former property owner used to use this alleyway and access his parcel on this far location. The applicant is now currently proposing to access the parcel at this location, which is where the carport is. This gets into the question of prescriptive rights. There is no easement, there is no alley. However, the property has historically been accessed that way for 50 years plus, establishing a legal right called a prescriptive right to cross Mr. Baker's property and this other parcel to get to it. If there was to be a challenge over that access, it would be settled through a civil matter, not under the jurisdiction of the city or the planning commission.
I'll give you one little bit of information. That house that we're dealing with was built in 1966. And I went off to college in 65, and my mother was a widow, and she got railroaded basically by Doc Palmer, who was the contractor, the principal contractor in this town, and Richard Roach, who was the superintendent of the school district. That was his house. And that garage originally was faced toward the cul-de-sac. And when I came home about 6 months later from college, guess where the door was? Coming out the back. Okay, so it was never approved by my mother or any of our family. That thing got railroaded in, and Roach used it sparingly. The people before the present people used it almost none. Okay, zero. They parked out on the cul-de-sac. They didn't want to be involved with the alley and whatever. And now it's turned back to where I think it's going to be very busy.
Well, I have a question. If I'm not sure I'm understanding correctly, but it sounds to me like before the access was on the other end, and now it's going to be on the. So I'm wondering if the prescriptive rights would distinguish between those two access points, since they're far away from each other, or would it involve the entire alley?
So the access to the parcel has always come from this end of the alleyway.
I thought you said to the other.
However, it previously
Used to be further
accessed
away.
the garage that was on this side of the parcel.
I see.
The applicant's
I
now
thought the access
proposing
was there.
to access their carport from this
So
side
it's
of the
even
parcel.
shorter, yeah.
In
Shorter
theory,
alley.
meaning that they will not need to drive across this portion of Mr. Baker's property.
Okay.
However, as I mentioned, the access, the right to access, the right to use that access is not in the purview of the Planning Commission. Further, the existing approved project allows the access to be done as proposed, accessing a single car carport at this location and a single car parking space adjacent to it.
Is that because of the prescriptive rights of the current homeowner to continue to access his property through the alleyway?
That's the current homeowner, I would imagine, purchased the property, and there was an access point to the property from that alleyway, and they proposed to continue utilizing it, and that's how we got to the situation we're in today, whereby the applicant is proposing to expand on the approved covered parking.
I would like to invite the applicant to come up, if that's okay. If you, sir, will take a seat and let him come up, because he's also here.
Good evening. My name is Rod Ellison. I'm the applicant for this project. Mr. Baker raises some interesting points, many of them, which took longer than 3 minutes, and a lot of which are historical. They've been dealt with, and they've been reversed, they've been handled. As to the, I'm sorry, you called me up here for a question.
Oh, I just called you up here in case you wanted a
If I had
chance.
anything to say?
If you, yeah.
Okay. As to the access, yes, we bought this house 2 years ago, and it was our understanding, the way the house was built, that the garage had been accessed from the rear since the house was built. I don't know. Historically, I haven't been around that long. But definitely there was access up the alley and a big driveway, big gravel driveway, and the garage was accessed from the rear of the house. So this brought up the question of, do we have access to this? And Mr. Baker had written to me and had written to the city objecting to us accessing our property from the alley. And I say that with a capital A, sir. I say that alley with a capital A, okay? Anyway, so I called I got some help on it. I called an attorney. She did some research with a title company. And what she found was that that alley had been deeded to the city before Bakers bought the property in 1940. I do not have that information on me, but I believe it has been sent to Debbie Height at the city back when this all happened. So that's a matter of record in our file, should be. So here we are confused as to who owns the alley and who can access it. That was my understanding, and I wrote to Mr. Baker and said, here's what we found. So that's on that issue.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? No.
What about the fence? Was there a variance for a 9-foot fence, or did you know about that?
The fence was based on the grade of the yard. It was a replacement fence. We tore down the old one that was partially falling down. We replaced it. It was based on the height of the grade of the yard inside the house, inside the property. And as to the alley being torn up, I'm happy to re-gravel it, but it was gravel and dirt before we got there, so it's only paved as far as basically the end of our rolling gate. And the end of the alley's always been gravel.
So you're saying that your property is about a foot higher than the road, so that's why it's an 8-foot fence, but it's 9 feet from the road, but from your side it's 8 feet.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you have in the records?
I have not measured the fence. The fence is not before the planning commission. They were approved to replace the fence with the previous design review approval, and they are expected to comply with all zoning criteria. However, if there's a grade change between the alleyway and their parcel, then that gets into subjective call.
Okay.
Up at the west end, I think you'll find our fence is shorter than 8 feet. And so we wanted to keep it level, so we started at the tall end and worked backwards. As to the gate at the far end of the alley, it's an access gate into the alley. My understanding, as I stated earlier in my remarks, was that it is a public street. It's owned by the city, so I should have access to walk out a gate and walk down that street or take a bike out of there or whatever. So the gate is based on that.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? Would anyone else like to speak at public comment? All right, I'm going.
Can I make 2 comments?
You know, we really don't do a back and forth. You've
He's referring to the street as gravel. That was a chip seal.
I know, but sir, you've had your more than 3 minutes, so you've had your time.
It was chip sealed by the city.
Thank you. I'm going to close the public comment and invite commission deliberation discussion.
I think one important thing would be to find what was delivered, the deeded note to the city that was sent into your predecessor or the interim, Ms. Height. And the other question that I would have is if we can get confirmation of the discrepancy between what the applicant handed in as code and just confirmation that the 3-foot setback is the 3-foot setback. Because if that in fact is correct, then it really boils down to the plan we have at hand, I think.
I agree. I would like to continue this to gather that information and then come back as a consent calendar item, if that's possible. Because a lot of this seems like it's out of our purview and really more of a civil matter that's outside of the city's jurisdiction.
Yeah, from the department's perspective, the setback is correct and accurate. However, Mr. Baker came in and brought the code issues to me in addition to the questions on ownership yesterday. I haven't had a chance to address that. No problem on researching it. One interesting thing is, just looking at the parcel lines, it could be that part of the alley was dedicated to the city and the remainder as it crossed the other two parcels was not, which, because a portion of the alley is a separate parcel and a portion of it is not. And that's what it appears to be, but I can do the research and verify.
That would be great.
Director Hash, one further question. Do you know this, or even for Mr. Palmer, what would happen in an event like this where the city may be in an opportunity to acquire the remaining part of the alley? I know that the city isn't flush with cash right now to acquire a part of the alley, but at the same time, if there, what is the process for that? If there could be any kind of update at the commission's next meeting, that might be helpful as well. I mean, I think that's in the best interest of all parties involved here, long term, would be for the alley to continue to, and obviously for the current property owners, I think there's probably 2 of them, to be compensated for the strip some which way or another. So.
Yeah, and it was interesting for me to hear that there's been no change in the setback with the already approved 1-car carport and the 2-car. It looked to me like there was, but there's not. So
it got closer to the side yard, but not the rear.
Oh, there is a change in the side yard, though. Okay.
But it's going kind of the wrong. It's going the length the opposite way. Yeah.
Oh, right. I meant
the width of the parcel rather than into the length.
Change, yeah.
Or vice versa.
All right. Do I have a motion to continue this?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Heil,
Yes.
Monette,
Yes.
Kistner,
Yes.
Chair Parker.
Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 6. This is a part of our public hearings. This is PL 15-012. It's a demolition permit and design review for 1250 Springbrook Court. Do we have a staff report? Yes, we do. I know we do. May I have it?
So the project before you today at 1250 Springbrook Court is a demolition and design review proposing to demolish an existing 2,250 square foot single family home and construct an approximately 3,200 square foot home. The project came before the Planning Commission on May 19th of this year at a public hearing. Numerous comments were received, both spoken and written, which identified concerns over the visual impacts of the development, the size and scale of the home proposed, impacts to the riparian area of the adjacent creek, as well as the trees that grow in that area, and general concerns over how the home fits into the context of the neighborhood. The Planning Commission identified similar concerns in their review of the project and requested additional information be provided by the applicants, including an arborist report, fully dimensioned plans, a landscape plan including riparian habitat plantings, information on the eastern facade and fence elevation, and requested that story poles be installed to identify the proposed height and footprint of portions of the structure as it relates to the property directly to the east. And then the Planning Commission further requested potential design considerations to eliminate some of the cupolas that were part of the architecture, revise or reduce the covered porch designs, reduce the proposed height and building footprint. The applicants have responded as identified in the staff report by providing the arborist report, providing a landscape plan which incorporates native plants into the riparian area, reducing the mass and profile of the building. Specifically, an entry element was completely removed. The square footage of covered porches have been reduced by approximately 250 square feet. and a smaller cupola has been proposed and relocated into a more central portion of the home. And the floor elevation was lowered by 1 foot. In addition, the home itself was essentially completely redesigned to relocate the living areas, how it sits on the site, and include the project also eliminated the proposed swimming pool that was a part of the previous project or previous proposal. And story poles were installed for a period of time with planning commissioners notified as to when they were available to allow those to be viewed to help understand the future and proposed footprint. Since the previous meeting, 4 additional comment letters have been received by staff. Majority of them request that the project be continued as other folks or those folks weren't going to be able to meet today. And then also continue to identify concerns over the scale and massing of the proposed home. Staff finds that the proposed project meets the design criteria of the zoning code and general plan, including height, setbacks, floor area ratio, etc. Staff further finds that the applicants have provided the requested information and responded to the Planning Commission direction. And given this, it is recommended by the Planning Department that the Planning Commission approve the project as proposed. And if the Planning Commission chooses to do so, there are 2 typos in the resolution, specifically condition 8 and 9, which staff is requesting be deleted should the Planning Commission choose to approve the project. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Does anyone have any questions for staff? All right, I'd like to invite the applicant.
Good evening, commissioners, staff. I'd like to just kind of go through this item by item and address the concerns and talk about the things that we did to address those specific concerns, starting with the issue of massing and the height of the structure. At the meeting.
And just to clarify, are you looking at page 3 on your letter in our packet?
Actually, I'm just going through my own outline
right.
for kind of how I'm going to address this. Anyway, at the previous meeting, what we heard was there was an appearance of a 2-story. There were the clear stories, specifically in the great room, the entry tower, and some of the cupolas gave the perception that the house, felt like it was potentially a 2-story building. And then also there was some concern about massing, and there was some suggestion that possibly the amount of covered porch was contributing to the perception of mass and making the house feel larger than was comfortable for the neighborhood. So just to kind of recap kind of how it used to look, I wanted to show you the original submittal. Too much paperwork here.
Cindy.
I stopped the clock for a couple seconds.
I believe it's upside down.
Okay, hopefully you can recall that image. That was the previous presentation. Sorry about that. The clarity is not too focused there, but anyway, the entry tower you can see in this image was some of the concern, and you can see in the background there was an element in the great room that added mass that was expressed to be of some concern, and also the cupolas, which, though they were in the distance in the background, they were more of an issue, I think, to the neighboring property. So what we did to address that, we completely eliminated the water tower. As you can see, it's gone. The garage and its mass stayed the same except the floor dropped. And in fact, the entire building floor dropped, which helped bring the entire thing down. And the clear story element that was in the great room was completely removed. And the cupolas were repositioned or removed completely. I can show you in another illustration. This diagram shows an overlay of the previous plan and the current plan. So you can see just with the addressing of the massing that the building had quite a bit of impact on the neighbors over here to the east. And in an effort to deal with that, the building was pushed away considerably from that location and also rotated and pushed away from the back part of the lot. And a lot of that was prompted by a willingness of the owners to completely eliminate the pool, with concerns about water, and also the arborist had one concern about the potential of the pool potentially impacting trees. We decided that would be the one thing that could go. The blue is the new, and the hatched area inside the bold line is the old. So once we decided that it was okay to say goodbye to the pool, that allowed the opportunity for the building to rotate and shift and move away. And that freed up quite a bit of space, I think, especially for the benefit of the Howards on the easterly side. As you can see, all that hatched area in this area here and over here was previously building really more, affronting them and building mass that they could perceive. So all that blue area is where it is now, pushed back considerably. There was also, of course, you heard concerns about the cupola that was over the master suite, which is right here. So that cupola was completely removed because the whole master suite was moved, and that was moved to the other part of the building. And the only cupola that's there now is right here. That is now where the living room, dining room, and kitchen is. Yes, yes. In fact, I can show you, Bobby, just to clarify that, what that looks like in the elevation view. So this is what you saw in your packet. Basically, that cupola is way back here now, which is right here, or you can also see it in this view here. So the overall amount of porch was reduced by 250 square feet, as was mentioned. And of course, you saw in that illustration that the color scheme was also changed, which we think significantly changes the impact and the perception of mass. So the previous scheme, which was the light cream colored with the more metallic roof, has been changed to a much darker roof, and the overall composition of material is more like this. I actually brought physical samples of all these materials. Specifically, I wanted to kind of show you guys the roof. And the siding. So these are the actual colors of them. They don't show up. They show up a lot brighter, I think, in that photograph than they do in reality. If you want to pass those around, you're more than welcome. So it's quite a bit, obviously darker. It's much more muted, and I think it gives the building a much more grounded feel. Watch out, there might be some sharp edges on that metal. Some of the other concerns had to do with the overall location in which we discussed to a certain extent and the overall size. And though the building was only reduced about 13 square feet total, the perception of mass was reduced significantly between the reduction in area for the covered porches and between the overall shrinking of volume through the reduction of area inside the great room, the loss of the water tower, and the loss of some of the cupolas and massing that way. There was a significant actual volume reduction. So I'd just like to point out some of the benefits that came as a result of this from the neighboring properties. On this plan, you can see that this location right here is where the old location of the building was. That's where the porch used to be. Now there's a building, the building's back here, and there's porch right here. And I want to point out that this porch is transparent with the exception of posts located on the corners, and one here and one here. So from views across of the Howards and looking across this way, with the exception of the roof portion above, that is a very transparent element. It's also a very important element for the owners because it's a covered space where that's the only really large enough covered space for them to put a big table because of the limitation of the setback from the creek and the limitation of the setback on the side yard and the minimal depth of the building to fit a kitchen and a dining room in that one area. This porch over here on the creek side it's a narrow porch and really not big enough to accommodate a table. So they want a place where they could have a seating area with a protected environment. It could stay out there year round. So that porch is very important. It's open, it's transparent, with the exception of a small section of roof above. So I just wanted to point out that whole area right there is opened up, and this area here was solid all the way across here, and now this is the line where the view is impeded. And this illustration shows a little bit more graphically. If you look at this one, you can see that all these lines I showed are from windows in the Howard's house. It just shows you that we've made a great effort to improve their view. The lines farthest to the west are where their view was most restricted before from these different points. And the lines farthest to the east, these are to the west, are the ones that are now the most restricted. So you can see their view improved, their view cone improved by that much on each of these locations. There's no view restriction obviously in this direction, but their view basically improved, went from here to here that much better, from here to here that much better, from here to here that much better. And with regards to the creek and the trees, as indicated, the arborist who we met with initially conducted a second review of the property, and that was based on the final design and concluded that the trees are in good health, and with the intention of building the house with a drilled pier and grade beam foundation, there is no real negative impact as a result of the construction. And in the area of the riparian setback there, we've made some extra effort to revegetate that whole area with native planting. So the area that you're seeing all inside that 20-foot creek setback right there will be really left to be habitat for the flora and fauna that would normally, live there. A couple other issues that we've heard, or one was that we've heard there's been concern about what to do with parking, during construction. And I think we spoke about that a little bit at the last meeting. It's our intention to make sure we organize parking in such a way that the general contractor will either have a van where he parks people off-site and he takes them to and from the job site. The subcontractors will be required to practice that same method of bringing their employees, so there will be the absolute least amount of impact possible. It is a difficult spot when you're in, an existing neighborhood, and there will be traffic, but the owners are totally aware of that, and we'll give you every assurance that we will make it a requirement of the contractors to adhere to the strictest requirement of limited car parking on the street. Just want to speak a little bit about the fencing and as well, and that if you look on this map, you can see what we've decided to do is go with a stone fence and leave the Howard fence in place. We're going to put a 6-foot stone fence only up to this point, and that would allow the Prestons to be able to turn their tractors around and still be able to cultivate their vineyard. And then from this point forward, this would turn into more of a hog wire fence, and it would be fairly transparent with just low shrubbery. So since the living space has moved out here, there's now some glass here and glass here. So what's happening is that this wall helps provide privacy from the Howards and from the Camps, and then it allows also their views from the Howards not to be restricted. So the solid part of the fence stops here, so that nothing is impeded with their view through at this point, and vice versa. The Camps can see through this section and look across the vineyard, not this way. So, and at the same time, respecting the ability for the tractors to maneuver back there. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Is the garage included in the 32 square foot that you're calculating far from?
We calculated the FAR just the way the calculations allow. There's a 580 square feet of addition.
A garage that you've taken out.
Yeah, we took the 200 square feet allowable that you can take out. We had, we have a total living area of 3,235 feet. Our garage area was 584, giving us a total of 3,819 square feet. And then you take the 3,819 and you minus the 200 to give you the 3,619. And our allowable FAR, by the way, is 23.4%, which would allow us to have 4,086 square feet. What we're proposing is 20.7 square feet and 3,619 feet, 20.7%.
Does anyone else have any questions for the applicant, or would you like to wait?
Do you have any confirmation from the Prestons that the maneuvering of the tractors works with what their hopes was?
We got I don't know if you didn't see your email this afternoon. We got an email from them. Okay. It came and said that they had no further objections to the project.
Fantastic. Thanks. No.
All right. Perfect. If we have any questions after hearing the rest of public comment, we'll call you back up.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
Hi, I'm Patrice Ferguson. I want to thank the staff we jumped through hoops, but they also jumped through hoops to get this reviewed. I'm very gratified that they're willing to recommend approval of this project. They have told us that they were pretty impressed by the substantial revisions that we did. And it came about because we decided that we were going to try to provide more green space all in here for the Howards, so that we were not right up on the setback line on the building. You can probably see it better on the other. Well, just use that. And then the other thing is, by not putting a fence on the property line right here, we create more green space and in here for the Howards and for the Prestons. And we have met with the Prestons, and they are very appreciative that we're going to, that there's not going to be a fence that prevents them from turning their tractor around. Last meeting was not easy. A lot of issues that were raised, and some of the things we heard from the first time from the commissioners. Commissioner Monette wanted to show me an alternative without a swimming pool. We did you one better than that. We just eliminated it. We had to do these things because of the shape of the lot and to pull back from the structure on the lot line or on the building line, to pull it back, get it away from there, and then move it towards the center. And this is not exactly what I thought. I mean, I am disappointed about losing the swimming pool, but I can get over it. I have the same with the water tower. We think that this is a good alternative for the neighborhood and what we see. So those were sort of the points that I had for you. We're ready to get going. We've really tried to communicate with the neighbors, and we know it's difficult for them too, but we really do want to make it work, and we feel like we've really done as with this revision a really good job in addressing the problems and the issues that they had, and even more importantly, the issues that you all had. The color thing, somebody called up and said, one of the neighbors, we really would like to see you darken the color. And then I heard from another neighbor, well, we liked it when it was light. And I'm like, okay, some of these, there's some tension, and we're trying to balance out the tensions that are happening, but we appreciate the comments back. And like I say, I feel like we jumped through a lot of hoops to put this together, and the staff did too. So I think that's it. I think, anybody have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Not at this time. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to speak? A public comment.
Good evening. I'm Roger Riccardi. I own and live at 1251 Springbrook Court. The proposed home at 1250 Springbrook Court is still not in harmony with, nor does it conform to existing homes on the street. Therefore, I believe it is out of compliance with the Springbrook Court subdivision restrictions. The home is still too large and too tall. A total structure of 2,500 to 3,000 square feet would be much more appropriate. In addition, I share the neighbors' concerns regarding Heritage Oaks, proximity to Springbrook Creek, and parking. Further, I believe the massive home with a high cupola will likely impact the neighborhood with light pollution due to the high windows seemingly difficult to shade. And I'm asking, I haven't seen a light plan, but has a lighting plan been reviewed? Thank you for denying the demolition permit and requiring the applicant to still make more significant design changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Marilyn Coy, and my husband and I, Nick, we are 31 years on Springbrook Court as homeowners and residents. But first off, I would like to thank Matt for his service to the commission, and good luck. From what we could see, as far as the revisions, it only really reduces the footprint by about less than 300 square feet. So shifting things around is one thing, but it's still very massive. Though the pool has been cut from current plans, what's to prevent them from adding the pool off to the right at a later date? I could see that. I've sort of heard rumors. Something to think about. The view shed of the neighbors from the east side and the south side of the street, from Spring Street back, you can see the story poles from on Valley View quite easily. It's still very blocked. The covered porch impedes the view also. We talked about maybe them taking that off, but I don't see that happening. The height and scope of the rear of the house is about the same. The corner is just shifted a little bit. Even though it's not a two-story home, it takes up about the same amount of space, I believe. When our subdivision restrictions were put in place, I think when they said no 2 stories, they were thinking of the overall height. With this said, this project does not conform to or be in harmony with the existing homes in our subdivision. We're also very concerned about the additional traffic and parking problems for another year during construction, landscaping, and finishing. There's also several concerns from neighbors who could not be present. I believe they sent letters too, so that's something to consider. They have tried to change things, and I applaud them for that, but I still think that the scope of the project is too large, too big, too much blockage. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
Suzanne Ortega. I'm only speaking personal comments tonight. I don't represent any committees in the city. I had some questions about the plan that I looked at on my own. I haven't talked to anybody at staff or neighbors, but I'm focusing on the oak trees that are along Spring Creek. And it appears from this revision that all, is it 5 trees going to be on their property preserved with this permit? Is that how you understood it?
I believe there might be 7 according to the
7
arborist
listed,
report.
But some look like they're in the creek or across the creek, like number 7.
Yeah.
Tree location and numbering plan is what I'm looking at. It's pretty clear that number 1, 3, 5 are maybe on the property, and then the creek bed, if I interpret...
It looks like 6 and 7 are on the other side of the creek.
6 and 7. Oh, okay. 6 is?
Oh, no, 6 is only 7's on the other side.
Okay. So on this map where it has all these broken lines, is that the creek bed? Does that represent the creek bed? No.
The broken line is a creek setback requirement.
Creek setback. Oh, I'm talking about these broken lines. Is this the property line?
I believe that's the creek setback line. Okay. No, I'm sorry.
She's looking at a different map, Bobby.
Top of bank, yeah.
Okay, so these are going down into the bank. So there are a couple trees there are a couple trees down going on the bank down. Okay. So are they all going to be preserved? Is my question.
There are no trees proposed to be removed.
Great. And I noticed that the arborist wrote up a guidelines which seemed very clear and thorough. will this be part of the conditions of approval? And will the preserved trees be specified in detail? I guess you have a map, so I'm assuming that would all be part of the conditions of approval?
There is not currently a condition requiring arborist recommendations be followed during construction. However, should the planning commission choose to, can be added.
Okay, that's what I would recommend. Otherwise, there won't be any follow-up or monitoring. It could be up to a contractor, subcontractor to decide, oh, we need this out of the way, or we need to dig down or do some of these things. Anyway, conditions of approval would be helpful. I had a couple questions about the soil listed. Can I ask that?
Sure.
Okay. There was some information about fill of soil around the trees. That's very important not to do. And there are guidelines with the best management programs, or ISA, that indicate what not to do with covering the roots of the tree. That's as bad as digging and trenching around the roots under the drip line. So I hope that could be addressed in maybe a tree protection plan with the conditions of approval. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public comment? The applicant does have a chance to come back up again if...
I will just say that it is our full intention to take the utmost care of these trees, and whether it's conditioned or not, everything that the arborist is put in the report and every recommendation that he's made is something that we will adhere to. As you can see, the construction is well away from the trees. There's small overlaps of drip line, and between that and the drilled pier foundation and the setback, the trees should remain in great vigor. That's all I wanted to say.
Perfect, thank you.
If I may follow up, Bill Abbott for the applicant, Abbott and Kinderman. You heard comments tonight, as you had before, regarding the question of harmony. And the point I want to emphasize is that comes from the CCNRs, but it's a little bit like the easement discussion you had earlier today. The commission's charge pertains to application of the city's enforcement, but you're not the court, so you can't interpret a set of CCNRs. And the city code doesn't ask the commission to apply the CCNRs in terms of making your decision. So we would ask you to apply, listen to what the applicant has done to respond to the 6 points that came out of the last meeting. I think that's the issue tonight. If you want to debate on CCNRs and CCNR enforcement, I'm happy to get into that, but that's probably not the best use of your time this evening.
What, we can't talk about privity?
Very good. You probably know it better than I do at this point in time. I'm getting a little gray, but I do know my basics on CCNR, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to close the public comment and invite commission discussion. Commissioner Heil, would you like to lead us off?
I'll go first. I suppose I'll be tarred and feathered if it's my last meeting. I don't know, lame duck.
Take advantage.
I think that the applicant has frankly done a pretty amazing job to respond to the neighbors' issues and concerns. I think that we've in my 5.5 years on the commission, we've seen a lot less when there is issues that have been pointed out by neighbors. And I really think that the design is actually an improvement, and I was somewhat supportive of the design before, in the sense that there was this awkward oblong piece. I think it should be pointed out, and it was pointed out maybe towards the end of our deliberation or discussion at the last meeting, that this parcel is unique for the neighborhood. It's not like any of the other parcels on the lane, and that has to do with this kind of appendage that I believe was purchased separately from the parcel, the track that's part of the original development track. I think that the design that they did where they pivoted, removed the pool, responding to commission feedback, responding to the public, I think it's a vast improvement. I think that the views from the Howards are going to be much improved from the previous design and not, inordinately obfuscated. I think that the support we've heard from the Prestons regarding their tractor turnaround and the right to farm is also an important one, meritorious. I think this stone wall that then bleeds into a hog wire fence is a very elegant solution. I also noticed that, my initial concern was that they didn't respect that kind of Z in the parcel, but I see, they were able to draw the 10-foot radius along that corner to keep out of the setback, on the side yard there. So, I understand what Mrs. Coy was saying and many of the other neighbors. I think that there's a number of people that didn't really take a look at the new plans, certainly responding to the old plans and then feeling like only 250 feet were taken away. But I think this is really a substantial improvement with regards to the neighborhood. I think that the different building materials and colors, I can see how one person would prefer a lighthouse and another person prefer a dark or a natural house. But I do think that this, based on the renderings we've seen is kind of a vast improvement with regards to how it would fade into the tree line and fade into kind of the surrounding oaks, the Valley Oaks. And with regards to the story poles, I live at 1023 Valley View. I've driven by and I even got out of my car several times to look at the different vantage points. I mean, I think that the fact that you can see it from Valley View Street and from Spring Street, if you're looking left, right as you get to the stop sign. First of all, I hope you're stopping before the crosswalk so you don't hit my kids. But you can see the corner of the story pole, but if it's this natural toned cupola, it's going to fit right in with the cupola that you can see out of the corner of your eye. That is the one that was approved that Mr. Gleason has built. It's a very similar vernacular to what we see just down the street, but I realize it's a reduced version of it kind of does homage to that style of the water tower architecture. So, I think change is unsettling. And, the three houses, to give an analogy, on the other side of Valley View Street, right as you're going into Sulphur Springs, Sulphur Creek, was a huge change. It was jarring, and I think a lot of people really didn't like that design, didn't like how much it changed that look and feel. This, by comparison, is nothing, not nearly as impactful. And I think over time, as we've learned to kind of accept, and that's the new normal at the other end of Valley View Street, I think that this will blend in. And actually, I think it's going to be a nice residential addition to that neighborhood. I think we're well below the FAR. With regards to covered patios, I think it was said that it could easily be enclosed at a future date. I mean, certainly that would be a huge violation. Any kind of subsequent construction would be red tagged. I mean, any subsequent construction would of course have to go through plan review and design review and everything else. So, and quite frankly, the way that it's been set up with the outdoor dining on the porch there, I think it just really makes sense. I mean, I think the applicants really rethought the entire house, put the master bedroom on the most private part towards the creek, and then have this now their kind of great room on the part of the parcel that juts out. And I think that kind of solves a lot of the issues that we were facing. So in general, while I understand that there are concerns by the neighbors, certainly the Conwell's parcel looks straight back at this. There's just no way around it. They're going to see something where they saw nothing before, but they're well within their FAR. They're well within their allowable lot coverage. It's designed to the building and development standards that are currently in place. So overall, I'm in support of this application. And I understand also that people, are out of town and that they'd like a chance to weigh in. But I think we did hear from a number of those people, and I think that they were listened to. And if they weren't, or if I felt like they weren't, I don't know that I'd feel as comfortable as I do with this revised plan. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
I have just a few things to add to that. First of all, I also want to commend the applicants. I think they've made some remarkable changes that are positive and will be beautiful when executed. Speaking to the CCRs, I think to me that's a little bit of a challenge in that I don't believe any of those are intended to freeze us in time. I think they're intended to kind of protect the overall feel and ambiance of a neighborhood, but I don't believe that it means that we're locked into design standards of a former time. I think that as design convention changes and moves forward, we see homes that look different, and I think that that is fine. In this area, we have a lot of barn structure, so I think that does pay homage. So I myself find it to be a beautiful design. The lot is bigger. There's no question about it. If we were to apply some of the standards I think that other neighbors are mentioning in terms of a size ratio on a lot of other homes in that neighborhood might be too big if you wanted to look at it that way. So I think that we can't ignore the fact this is a dramatically larger house, or larger lot, and they're still staying within constraints of that. And then the last thing, which I know I empathize with, I'm challenged by, is this notion of view. But views, I think that our applicant has been very respectful and tried to make changes to support and to protect views, but views in themselves are not protected. It is something that without owning the lot, the best, if you want to protect a lot or protect your view, they need to own the lot. And I think speaking a little bit to the Preston property, that is zoned medium density, and at some point down the road that could be sold and it could be developed. So these are the views that the Conwell see today. There's nothing to protect them down the road. The property itself is zoned in a way that could be subdivided. So, I think to hold this applicant accountable to something that really is already been laid out by zoning itself is not fair. So I'm in support. I think they've done a nice job. Thank you.
I think they've done a nice job of trying to help the
Grace,
neighbors.
Grace microphone.
Turned off a while ago. I think they've done a very good job of trying to help the neighbors. I still personally find it too massive. However, under our current zoning fire arrangements, I don't think that we can turn this down. I would still like to see the FAR changed, as we've talked about in the past. I think 3 or 4 months, and I will approve the project, and I like the design of it. I think it's very pretty, but I think it should be smaller.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's see. I also commend the architect and the applicants for really making an effort to conform to what was being asked. However, I think that where our discretion comes in is to, is philosophical in a way. It's not objective. And my sense is that the new normal needs to be closer to the current character of the town as we move forward with this and other projects. I do think that the views, Matthew, I'm going to miss you, that the views will be inordinately obfuscated.
Yeah, nice word.
I love that's a hard one to say, but I don't agree that they won't. I do believe that all the changes were great, except that it still goes, it's just I saw the story polls, and it's still this massive addition that is going to significantly block the views. And again, I feel that we should be moving. I think we've had a mandate from the community to move in the direction, even though it's not codified yet, to really respecting the views and to get it codified, as they disappear, as this town gets bigger and the views are disappearing, that they are protected by ordinance. And I'm hoping that we can include these somehow in the near future with our considerations. And I consider it now. And then, I agree that the FAR, it is in compliance with the FAR, but I think that it is nevertheless too big for this location in terms of the rest of the neighbors, and because especially the adjacent neighbor is going to have such a huge change in their quality of life with respect to the feeling of openness and the views that they're going to lose. So I cannot support it. I think it should be smaller, and that extension that blocks their view should be way up to where the end of the current patio is. I don't think that's possible, and I'm in a minority here, but I will say I also feel that, you must have canceled your trip to Italy. It's interesting. I thought that I didn't know that you were going to be here tonight. It's okay, but I really feel the Howards who are most impacted by this should be able to have another say. I think everyone was listened to, but they have not. There's another chapter here. They're going to have a comment in response to all of these changes, and I think that they should have a chance to make those comments in the public forum. So at this point, I would want to continue it until the Howards can be here to give their response to. They already have by letter, but to be in the public forum to give their views on this huge change to their life. So I can't support it as everyone else is here tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Monette. I am in support of the project. I do feel that I agree with Commissioner Heil that change is inevitable, and I also believe it's inevitable that someone was going to build on that portion of the lot. I do think that this is a good use of the size of the lot, the uniqueness, the strange conditions of it. I do have concerns with the covered porch, but I also understand it's a vast improvement of what was there before, and I do think it's a valid compromise. It's not the compromise that I would have wanted, but I still think that it doesn't make it invalid. I do believe that the brown color does blend in better with the neighborhood. I do like that. I also, looking at them, like, those trees are very empty, and I have to remember that this picture was probably taken in the wintertime, and so with the greenery and with the landscaping, it will blend in even further and won't be so starkly contrasted. Wanted to commend the applicant on the parking again. I don't know if anyone else brought that up, but 2 parking spots, and then it seems like there's plenty of space for multiple cars, possibly even 6 or 7 if you had to. It's still, you're taking into account that you are in a weird spot in that cul-de-sac where you don't have street parking. You are all going to be driveway parking. I do like that you did switch the porch around. It's, you took advantage of the nice side of the views on that side of the property. I am concerned with the conditions with the trees, and I'm going to leave that to my fellow commissioners on putting the arborist report as a condition of approval. Doesn't seem like you guys have a problem with that, so you guys are all saying that's fine, and I just would like to leave that to my commissioners as that part of being the motion, whoever makes that motion. But yes, I just want to say, I think it's a great design for the lot. It's a weird lot, and I think that you did the best that you could with it, and if we could have a motion.
I think, is there a standard condition of approval that we could add, you don't have to, that we've used on previous projects where, the arborist report and recommendations, shall be followed? And I believe the technical term that I've heard thrown around is a tree monitoring report, or
best practices.
Yeah, something like that. So with that condition added, I suppose, and conditions 8 and 9 removed, as was stated earlier, I would move with those edits, to find this project exempt from CEQA pursuant to, I guess we would, we approve the project as revised pursuant to the, attached resolution in the staff report. Okay, that's my motion.
I second that motion.
Commissioner Heil?
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Monette?
No.
Kistner?
Yes.
Chair Parker?
Yes. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to item number 7. But before I get there, does anyone need to take a recess? All right. All right. Okay, we'll not be taking a recess. Moving into item number 7, PL 15-022. It's a short-term rental permit for 1450 Stockton Street. If we could have a staff report.
Surely. As Chair Parker-Parson described, the application before you is a short-term rental permit at 1450 Stockton Street. The city currently has a cap of 25 short-term rental permits allowed in the city. A permit became available when a previous permit holder decided not to renew after their 2-year permit expired. As required by the short-term rental ordinance, a notice of application for a short-term rental permit was provided to all property owners within 300 feet of the subject property after the application was received. If written protests comprise 30% or more of the owners within the 300-foot distance, then the application must be submitted to the Planning Commission for consideration, which is why this item is before you this evening. Neighbor opposition to this short-term rental permit are focused on the following items: parcel sizes and widths in the vicinity of the permit parcel, narrowness of Stockton Street and parking, nature of the community in the Pine Street, Stockton Street area, proximity to other short-term rental properties, noise, and safety. While there are neighbor concerns about the issuance of a short-term rental permit at this address, short-term rentals are a permitted use with a short-term rental permit within the medium-density residential district. The city would also benefit from TOT revenue collected from an active short-term rental permit holder within the city. Should also be noted that the planning director can revoke a short-term rental permit at any time if the permit holder has violated any provision of the short-term rental ordinance. The Planning Commission should either approve or deny the application after considering the effects the proposed use would have on surrounding uses and the cumulative impacts within the community. In approving a short-term rental application, the Planning Commission must make the use permit findings described in the staff report. Lastly, a member of the public wanted me to point out that I numbered the required findings, whereas the municipal code letters them. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
I actually do have a question. Which permit did not renew?
I don't know off the top of my head.
All right, you can email me later. All right, does anyone else have any questions for staff?
Just as a procedural matter, I believe this is the first time we've had a short-term rental. We had the first 25. We've had maybe 2 previous hearings about short-term rental permits where there was a question or for clarification. But is it my understanding that essentially 25 permits have been issued, and this would be the first number on the waiting list?
Correct.
To come up?
That's
and
there were actually a couple others that were ahead for various reasons. They weren't able to proceed. One didn't have any off-street parking, so they were disqualified. Another was no longer interested.
Okay.
But yes, this is the first up on the waiting list.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. Is Darlene Walsh willing to be the contact person or not? And if not, who is?
There was a comment in the application that said that she was supposed to be the person per the application, then said that she wasn't willing.
I've received no indication that.
Well,
I believe that was in one of the letters that Bobby's referring to.
Yes,
Right.
In order to.
You'll ask the applicant. You'll have to ask the applicant.
In order for the application to be complete, that is supposed to be in place.
They're listed in there, and I've received no indication that they don't want to be.
I got you. Okay, so we need to. All right.
The
And then I want to know about the alleged past violations of the ordinance that are fairly obvious if the documentation that I received is accurate from ads of renting it for less than 30 days.
Again, you ask the applicant.
Okay, so you didn't consider that when you were.
There's nothing in the ordinance to disqualify them at this time from proceeding with their application.
Or that would interfere with it being.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay.
All right.
I guess I'd like to know who's receiving the complaints and who's checking them out, because all I heard when they did the annual review was that they'd had no complaints, and then I see all these complaints, and I don't know who's receiving them and why you guys aren't getting them. I think we've got to look at the whole picture. Yeah.
Which complaints are you referring to?
I'm talking about the people that are living in various places in the city that you guys aren't seeing.
We receive very few complaints.
Well, they've called the police. Did the police tell you guys? That's what I'm asking.
There's noise complaints at the police department.
That's what I'm saying, Aaron. I think we've got to have a better fix.
I think that we need to agendize the ordinance and make a few revisions that we.
Definitely.
Yes. So.
Well, I think.
But before we get into that, let's do the application that we have in front of us, and then we can talk about what we want to revise in the future, and we can agendize that.
Staff will be bringing forward a short-term rental ordinance revision to the Planning Commission.
Okay, I think we really need to look at that. Thank you.
We do.
All right. All right.
So can you tell me how much money we made on TOT with the 25 rentals last year?
That'll be part of the presentation that we bring forward for the.
One more question: how large is the waiting list?
It's approximately 25 people.
Okay. All right. Any other questions of staff before I ask the applicant to come forward? Going to open up public comment. Is the applicant here? Would you like to come forward? You do get to have, you have 15 minutes now and you get 5 minutes at the end, so.
Hi, I'm Mila Holt. We bought the house about almost 2 years ago, and we bought it as a house to retire to. I don't see many neighbors here that I know. We've really made an effort to get to know our neighbors, so I think there are some neighbors from around the corner that I don't know. But our goal from the time that we moved here was to get to know neighbors and to try to be a good part of the community. So when we have done rentals in the past, which have been 31-day rentals, we've made a very big effort to make sure that the people that we rent to are going to be quiet, and we rent to older people who are going to be very responsible. So we have in our rental agreement a noise agreement. There's parking rules so that people have to park off the street in our driveway. We have limitations on how many people can be at the house. There's never been a party at our house. The people who are in there right now don't drink, and that we look for that, and we're happy if people don't drink. So basically, we love our house very much. We want only people in there who will take care of it, and we want the short-term permit so that we can be in the house as much as possible rather than having to rent it out for 31 days. Anything else I'm forgetting?
I'm Tyler Johnson. I'm the co-owner and husband of Mila Holt. We're a low-impact family. It's a very low-impact house. I don't know if you've seen it on 1450 Stockton, but it's back from the street. It's, there are green trees in front. It's surrounded by a hedge. It's just a very low-impact place. I think some of the concern, we didn't see any of this coming, but I think some of the concern might be some of the changes on Stockton. This really isn't part of any of that. And it would continue to be extremely low impact because that's the way we like it. So.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Yes.
Sir?
Yes, is Darlene Walsh willing to be the contact person for your application?
Let's
or
ask.
not?
Darlene, are you willing?
Okay.
She lives right across the street.
Okay.
She's our neighbor directly across. And
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Oh, I was just saying, does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. What about the claims that, the letters that of people who were rating you or whatever, who described spending weekends at your place? There are several letters that we received with copies of reviews from people who had stayed at your house for weekends. Yeah. We did trial weekends for our friends and had them go use the house, and relatives and friends of friends. We didn't charge them any rent. We just asked them to go and use it and tell us that if it would be a good place to stay, give us suggestions of things that we should replace or things that we should add to the house. So none of those people actually rented the house. All right, thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
Shout out to Nino Debley for anyone here that might not know who he is. Good evening. My name is Tona Kovakovic. I am one of the closest neighbors to the applicant at 1450 Stockton Street. I am a St. Helena native, born and raised. I have a license plate that says I love my hometown, St. Helena. I even have a cemetery plot waiting for me on Spring Street. I was born here, plan to die here, God willing. My parents purchased our family home on Pine Street in 1967. My father owned a business on Main Street for many years. Our family history and our roots run deep in St. Helena. In the past 40-plus years, our neighborhood has become a family for many of us. We have a strong and respected bond. We look out and care for one another like a small-town neighborhood should. My neighbors all work hard to maintain the quiet, close-knit atmosphere we share on Pine Street. The home at 1450 Stockton has a 2-foot, 6-inch setback from my property line. Over the past 2 years, when I was experiencing loud noises coming from the neighbor's yard, I assumed it was the neighbors settling into their new home in St. Helena. When patio dining noise carried into the late evening, I opted to turn on a loud fan in my bedroom so I could sleep. It never occurred to me to call the police. I wanted to be a good neighbor and give them time to get settled. There is only 12 feet between my bedroom window and the swimming pool at 1450 Stockton. On hot evenings, when guests have opted for an evening or late night swim, I am forced to close my windows and turn on my fan. I am more than willing to do that for any of my neighbors, as I am confident they would do the same for me. That being said, I am not willing to compromise for short-term guests. Stockton Street, however, is very narrow. The lots are narrow. Noise is inevitable, but it does not need to be intolerable. Visitors to St. Helena are here for its charm, its great restaurants, and its great wineries. Visitors and short-term renters feel no need to connect to or be committed to the neighborhoods they are renting in. Therefore, I am speaking out against the short-term rental application for 1450 Stockton, and I thank you for your time. I do have a question. Is Darlene Walsh willing to be the representative 24/7? So if there is an issue at 1 or 2 in the morning, is she willing to address it? And would we call her prior to calling the police?
We will have her answer that.
Oh, terrific. Thank you for your time.
Would Darlene like to answer that question now, or do you want to? Okay, perfect. All right.
Thank you very much. I'm Katie Lynn. We live at 1440 Stockton, directly adjacent to the property in question. My husband Douglas Lynn and I, we moved to the property next door, and of course we share a fence line. This is our primary residence. Last year we moved from Madrona Avenue, where we lived for more than a decade, to Stockton Street, because we wanted to be on a more quiet, family-oriented block. Our objections to the issuance of an STR permit are outlined in the personal letter we submitted to all of you in detail, and a joint statement we submitted with most of our most immediate neighbors. But I'd like to review a few key points from that letter with you. First of all, I know I don't speak for myself and my husband when I say that I would like to know who's living on the other side of the fence from my home. I find the idea of transient tenants next door not only disturbing, but as a woman, potentially unsafe. We know that regardless of good intentions, and I'm sure their intentions are very, very good, the owners do not live in the city, cannot control what happens next door, and when tenants are paying top dollar for a short-term rental, nicety and good neighborliness will not prevail. I also wonder, and I'd like to ask the question legally, if once they receive a permit, whether the laws regarding discrimination in public accommodations will apply, and whether they indeed will be able to be as selective once these laws apply, being officially permitted within the city of St. Helena, which means that they will not be able to be as selective as they have been in the past. So I think that question remains to be answered. But the fact remains that these short-term renters will never see us again, and their behavior we cannot be promised it will be controlled. I don't think that's realistic. I also want to say that there are 9 children living within a 300-foot radius of the applicant. It is important for the commissioners to note that those families with children have all submitted letters in opposition to the issuance of this permit. They are Schaefer, McNeil, and Kelparis. So a recently parked car in front of 1450 Stockton was run into by a driver at 7:44 a.m. on the day when children were on their way to school. So the question is, with this really narrow street that we're on, where we only have one-sided street parking, do we really want to encourage more transient traffic on the street and be responsible for a potential accident worse than the fact that you have the letters, the 2 pets that have already been killed on the street this year? So that remains a question as well. Density. In our view, this portion of Stockton Street comprises one of the smallest lots in the city, as you can see. And the fact remains that these 5 houses, narrow houses on narrow lots in a row, let me just finish this, lack privacy, and they are much more like a condo complex. These lots are not laid out as if these are residential homes with buffer zones. We have no privacy. You can hear most conversations in our neighbor's yard. They can hear ours as well. This is not the block on which to approve transient tenants whose behavior cannot be monitored or regulated by the owners. And I think Mary Ann Brooks will speak very shortly about what has happened when a permit has been issued and to a home on a very narrow lot, and it certainly has disturbed the neighbors and the neighborhood. We believe, my husband and I believe, that approval will harm the character of the neighborhood as well as decreasing its safety for the residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Carolyn Kalparis. I live on Main Street for the last 45 years, but I'm the owner of record of 1421 Stockton Street. On the map that's shown on the screen, it's directly across the street from 1552. 1421 Stockton Street is actually 2 homes. It also includes 1612 Adams. This home has been in the Kalparis family for the last 60 years. Except for a brief time after my mother-in-law died, there's always been a Kalparis in one of those 2 homes. My son now lives in 1421 Stockton Street. He's been there for 11 years. When he only had 1 child, he was in the smaller house for 2 years. My children have been born and raised in St. Helena. My son and his wife teach in the local schools. I probably have more children in that house than anybody else in the neighborhood. My grandsons are 6, 8, 10, and 14. They are on their bikes, their skateboards, their razor scooters, and they're walking. They're crossing the street. Some of their friends live on the same side of the street as this proposed rental. The reference to the 2 cats that got killed in the same week last year, one of the owners of those cats lived directly next door to 1421. I am very concerned about the safety of my family, and for that reason, I ask you to deny this permit. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Ann Brooks. I reside at 1708 Main Street in St. Helena. I'm going to speak in regards to some of Grace's questions about complaints. I'm speaking against the approval of the short-term rental permit for 1450 Stockton. I reside next to a permitted short-term rental with a 15-inch to 3 feet setback, as presented in my letter and photo that is enclosed in your package. I think you saw that. My very narrow setback is comparable to Ms. Kovakovic's setback of 2 feet 6 inches, which she is adjacent to the 1450 Stockton Street. So our setbacks are some of the most narrowest lots in St. Helena. When the short-term rental was approved at 1732 Main Street in 2013, my great neighbor became a commercial hotel getaway overnight. With the narrow setbacks, I have noise, loud music, guests in and out all hours of the night, cars parked in front of my house, on the side of my house for days, and disrespectful vacationers, despite the rules that are posted. This owner of the house loves their home. They want nice people in there. They charge up to $1,200 a night. They want, they think they're getting respectful people, but that is not the case. I'm a single woman. I feel that my safety is very compromised. Most of the houses surrounding 1450 Stockton are single-person households as well. I also wanted to address the comment by the City of St. Helena, also the Chamber of Commerce, the St. Helena Star. They have all mentioned that there's no complaining on short-term rentals. This is so false, completely untrue. Myself and my neighbors, which wanted to come tonight, but we're going to save that for another venue, are continually calling the St. Helena Police Department, as we are instructed to do. We have raging parties. drunken people. They're throwing food into my yard. I'm not going to go over there and confront these people. So I call the St. Helena Police Department. So do my neighbors. That all that is documented with the St. Helena Police Department. So since there's obviously no cross-reference from the St. Helena Police Department to the city regarding the complaints, in the future, I've advised all of my neighbors that they need to make the complaint with the police department so they can handle it, which they do come out and handle it. And then we are going to be emailing Mr. Heacock all of our complaints. So be prepared. Okay, I'll finish quickly. The lovely, quiet neighborhood, which comprises Stockton Street and the Pine Street cul-de-sac and Adams Street, will forever change to a vacation getaway land. These lots are too narrow. The street is one of the narrow streets in town and cannot withstand a short-term rental. Stockton Street is also used by many children walking to and from St. Helena Elementary School and RLS, which is a huge safety concern. I respectfully ask that you deny the request for the short-term rental at 1450 Stockton Street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Brooks? Sorry, 1 second. Could you repeat the address of your
17 of my house?
Yeah, your house.
1708.
Okay, Maine.
Maine. I'm on the corner of Cornella and Maine.
Cornell and Maine. Okay, got you. I was just trying. We got a map, and I was just trying to place.
Yes, if you look at the narrow
place-
lot. My neighbor's lot goes from Main Street. In my packet and letter to you, it goes from Main Street all the way to Park.
Okay.
His lot has a swimming pool, a bocce court.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Brooks.
No question.
Hi, my name is Lisa Sambora. I live at 1443 Stockton Street. So I am across and then 2 houses down from the applicants. And I am here also because I do oppose the short-term rental permit for a myriad of reasons, 2 of which are parking and noise. With respect to parking, the way the ordinance is written, it looks like this particular property is a 3-bedroom home. So the allowable guests are 2 times the number of bedrooms plus 2 people, which would mean a total of 8 people. If you have 4 couples that decide to rent this home and converge in this home from different points of origin, you could technically have 4 cars coming into Stockton Street, into this particular block. 2 would go in the driveway, but the other 2 would have to go on the street. We are already challenged for parking and traffic on this street, as everybody has already spoken to. The street is very narrow. It allows parking only on one side of the street, and it is a huge challenge. Parking in general is a nuisance. I myself have had visitors that have come up. They've had to park down past Pine Street to visit me because there's no immediate parking across the street from my home. With respect to noise, the owners prior to 1450 Stockton Street were Amelia Kamen and Eric Yopes. Amelia and Eric did rent this property out as a short-term rental continuously. That is well known. And right now, 1440 Stockton Street is occupied by Katie and Doug Lynn. And prior to them, the owner was Cheryl Huller. She has since passed away. I was good friends with Cheryl, and Cheryl had numerous times had to call Amelia and Eric because of the fact that there were noisy short-term tenants on the property. Prior to Cheryl owning that property, it was owned by Andrew Moore and James McNair. I am also very close with them. I recently called them to talk to them about the issue. They also had issue with short-term renters being incredibly noisy. So I understand the applicants probably have the best intentions of trying to make sure that they will vet all of the rental applicants appropriately. There's going to be no way to tell, and you are going to get noisy renters. There's no way around that. It's going to happen. That just becomes a nuisance for all of us that live surrounding the property. So because of some of those reasons, I would respectfully ask that you decline this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wilson.
Good evening. I'm Connie Wilson, Scott Street.
And I'm actually representing my mother, Diane Wilson, who has resided on Stockton Street for 61 years. My brothers and I were born and raised on this street, and surprisingly, it still retains the family-friendly atmosphere of my youth, with a lot of young families and now grandchildren in the neighborhood. My mother and I respectfully request that you deny the short-term rental application at 1450 Stockton Street for the following impacts which cannot be changed or mitigated. Street safety, again, Stockton Street being one of the narrowest streets in town. Increased transient parking would only make this difficult situation even more so. Smallest lot sizes in town. People are on top of each other. Short property setbacks. Diminished property values for those wishing to sell and having to disclose an STR in the vicinity. Neighbors' civil rights to peace and quiet. Ms. Monette, you spoke of the huge change that the Howards would have to have in the previous discussion. This STR would dramatically change life for the adjacent neighbors in a huge way, and certainly not for the better. And again, safety of the young children and the elderly who reside in the neighborhood. Again, you cannot conduct a commercial operation in a residential neighborhood and expect to retain the character and integrity of that neighborhood for its citizens. This is a neighborhood with residents who have been here for generations. And I believe the overall intrusion of short-term rentals into neighborhoods is indeed a huge problem, contrary to what some may believe. And this particular application at 1450 Stockton Street in this neighborhood with these cumulative impacts that cannot be mitigated should be denied. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank Matt, too, for your service with the city. You've done a great job. My name is Lana Ivanoff, and I live on Pine Street. And I'm 3 doors down off of Stockton, and I'm about 50 feet from my yard is about 50 feet from the property that we're speaking of. The letter that you received in your packet was signed by myself and 14 other neighbors and families living on Pine and Stockton Street. And it's to express our concerns and list in great detail. We listed over 30 reasons why this vacation rental would impact our neighborhood negatively. I'm not going to go into those reasons because I assume that you've all read that letter. What I want to talk about is my neighborhood. We live in a really, really unique neighborhood, one that resembles St. Helena of yesteryear. Our neighborhood is made up of small homes. We don't have any McMansions yet. And we have really long-standing neighbors. Of the 15 signatures that are on your letter that we sent to you, 12 of those families compile 579 years of pride of ownership in this town. Our neighborhood is a quiet neighborhood, and we know each other's habits. We respect one another, and we watch out for one another. On any given day, you're going to find a lemonade stand down on the corner, or children pulling their wagons up and down the street, playing ball, walking back and forth to the elementary school. When turning onto Pine Street, sometimes you encounter Emma's cat laying and sunning itself in the middle of the street. Or you might find Al Del Bonio walking up and down the center of the street now with his walker, admiring everybody's flowers. When some neighbor's newspaper hasn't been brought in, we call that neighbor and we check to see if they're okay or if there's something that we can do for them. On any Saturday, we're all out there doing our own yard work. We don't have too many gardeners in the neighborhood, so we're all out standing in the middle of the street talking to one another. In our neighborhood, we nurture and protect one another. We had a neighborhood watch program long before the city implemented one. I consider many of my neighbors family, and we're connected to one another, and we're connected to this community. hang on. Having a transient commercial enterprise, basically a motel, wedged in between our homes would drastically alter the demographics of this well-loved neighborhood. One that we've invested years and years and years into creating and maintaining. My concerns are safety and noise. I don't want cars whipping around the corner of Pine and Stockton Street en route to the next fun wine country event and then finding out that it's a dead-end street and having to turn around. I don't want to worry about a constant parade of strangers invading my neighborhood day after day and week after week. I don't think there's a single person in this room that would want a party central 2 to 3 feet from their home and their bedrooms and their backyards. And that's exactly what's being offered to Tona and Katie and Doug. St. Helene has changed drastically in the 44 years that I've lived here. There's very few full-time residents living here anymore, but those of us who do, we cherish what we have. We've worked really hard to preserve what we have. Please don't take that from us, and please deny this request.
Before you start the clock, Matt, thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. It's great to have you in the last meeting.
I know. You were such a regular occurrence when we first started.
Well, I'm glad to say that I haven't been. So, thank you.
You can come back from time to time if you'd like to.
So, I'm not here to argue against the short-term rental ordinance specifically, but I am here to tell you that even though my wife and I live on Adams Street, we have 8 contiguous property lines to ours, and of those 8, 6 of them are actually along Stockton and Pine Street, and you can probably see that on there if you know where my house is. But the point is that I share a property line with 6 of the properties on Pine and Stockton, and so the whole interior backyard areas of our places are exceedingly pin drop quiet. It is a really quiet enclave because Stockton, cars have to drive slowly on Stockton because of safety concerns and because there's no traffic on Pine Street whatsoever. So it's a very quiet neighborhood. And what it means is that noise impacts people at a much greater distance in a situation where it's so much quieter, at least 3 to 4 times farther than in busier or active parts of town. So our property line is 50 feet, a mere 50 feet from the applicant's lot area where the pool and the hot tub is. So in summary, the acoustical and environmental setting in our enclave presents a unique situation where noise will create impact on a range of neighbors, not just the nearest ones, but the ones even farther away. So you've surely seen the neighbors' joint statement in opposition to this application. And in it, it lays out the facts regarding this specific location in this specific neighborhood and under specific conditions unique to the neighborhood. So it's about, and it's all in there, and I'm sure you've all read it, but it's about safety, it's about a narrow street, it's about 2 cars not being able to pass safely at speed or even half speed. You have to creep by each other to safely make it without touching. They're extremely narrow lots, the narrowest in town, with very short setbacks. The applicant's bedroom windows are a mere 2 foot 6 inches from Ms. Kovakovic's patio. This all creating greater than normal noise impact from a commercially based source and not from a neighbor that you can deal with. The document also shows that there's a nexus between the size of parcels and impact. We did a study of looking at the parcel maps of all the legal short-term rentals, and there were 3 that are on 50-foot wide lots. The rest are on lots that have an average of 80 to 85 feet wide. May I speak also for my wife for a minute or so? Thank you very much.
Please state her name and address for the record.
In this case, we live under the same roof. So there are three legal short-term rentals on 50-foot wide lots, and two of those have created incredible problems for their neighbors. They're narrow lots with short setbacks, and one of them you heard from Ms. Mary Ann Brooks about the problem she's had in her case, and the other one is at 1160 Church Street, where the problems have been documented with at least 4 neighbors that we know of. So I'm getting to the end here. Thank you. There are real existing examples in St. Helena that confirm what we intuitively know, that when houses and people are nearly on top of each other, the impacts are greater. It shows that very narrow lots, short setbacks, very narrow streets, all together constitute impacts when a short-term rental is set in the middle of all that. So, from each individual impact and cumulatively, the character of the neighborhood is not retained as is required by the short-term rental ordinance itself. In summary, this application at this address, under the physical circumstances presented, say that several of the findings that you must make in order to approve cannot be made, and therefore that the application must be denied. And I must say, I am certain that these are really lovely people, that they're sincere. However, the actual facts and the facts of impacts mean that we believe in several instances the findings cannot be made. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the leeway.
You're welcome.
I'm Leslie Dunlap. I live at 1510 Pine Street with my wife, Darcy. I'm going to address this in a little bit different manner. I once served as a planning commission in another committee, in another community. So I know that sometimes the emotional approach falls on some deaf ears anyway. So I would ask staff to clarify something. Is the off-street parking requirements for a short-term rental the same as a residential house? If so, it shouldn't be.
It's the same.
It is the same.
It's 2.
Well, you might want to reconsider that in the future. And that would be, I assume, 2 spaces? Are you aware that the 2 spaces at this said property is behind one another? One car behind the other? Yes. You are aware of that? Okay. You should be aware of that because, of course, that adds to the safety issue of people backing out all the time to let the other car in. And of course, as previously mentioned, if you have as many as 8 people there, you could have as many as 4 cars on that narrow street at Stockton. So the safety issue is the reason I would oppose to approve this. And so I urge you to deny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Larry Vermeulen, 1350 Oak Avenue. You know, one of the things that distinguishes us as a country is that we're a nation of laws. And by extension, the city of St. Helena is a nation of laws. And the laws are often implemented to protect health, safety, and the welfare of our citizens. So 3 years ago, the city enacted the short-term rental ordinance, and the impetus for this was the proliferation of unregulated and illegal short-term rentals. The ordinance sets forth 15 restrictions and standards designed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of not only our citizens, but of the guests. It also sets forth the procedures for application and public notice and permit processing, which of course is why we're here tonight. Additionally, there are sections regarding appeals and inspections. The sections I wish to address are those pertaining to enforcement and violations. I'll paraphrase the enforcement section 17.134.090. The planning director may revoke a short-term rental permit pursuant to this section if the planning director determines that the owner applicant gave false or misleading information during the application process, there's been a violation of any of the terms, conditions, and restrictions on the use of the dwelling unit for short-term rental use, the owner applicant has violated any provision of this chapter, the owner applicant has failed to timely pay the transient occupancy taxes required by this code. It seems to me that if the planning director can revoke a permit for any of these violations, then the planning commission can certainly deny the permit in the first place for those same violations. The section on violations, 17.134.100. Any property owner who uses or allows the use or advertises or causes to be printed, published, advertised, or disseminated in any way the availability of residential property in violation of this chapter is guilty of a misdemeanor for each day in which such residential property is used or allowed to be used in violation of this chapter. B, short-term rental use of a residential property in violation of this chapter is a threat to public health, safety, and welfare, and is thus declared to be unlawful and a public nuisance. Any such public nuisance may be abated and or restored by the enforcement official, and also may be abated pursuant to Chapter 1.12, except that the civil penalty for a violation shall be $1,000. Each day the violation occurs shall constitute a separate offense. And C, any property owner who uses or allows the use of residential property as a short-term rental without a permit shall be liable for the transient occupancy tax that would have been owed under Chapter 3.28 had the use been legal, including the penalty and interest provisions. So you have before you ample evidence that this property has previously been used for short-term use. I don't buy the applicant's argument that these were their friends that posted the reviews to the website. To grant them a short-term rental permit without first addressing these violations makes a mockery of the ordinance and reinforces the message that it's better to plead ignorance and beg forgiveness than it is to obey the rules in the first place. We have entirely too much of that in this city and this county, and it has to stop. I urge you to deny the applicant's permit, levy the fines, collect the past due transient taxes, and send a message that in the city of St. Helena, we will obey our laws. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're probably wondering, why am I up here? Marilyn Coy, Springbrook Court. This personally has been a fear of mine, this occupancy, part-time, and I'm worried that that could come to our neighborhood. I just wanted to let you know that people are concerned, and it sounds, when they're describing their neighborhood, I'm saying, well, that could be Springbrook Court very easy. And right now we have had turnovers. We live behind a house on Sylvaner that is a part-timer. And we've had some real issues. We've had to call the cops because of their behavior. So I guess what I really want to say is proceed with caution. I know there's been talk about increasing the number of permits so we can get more money through TOT. I fear that. So just know that there are people out there, maybe not as vocal as myself, who are afraid of turning our neighborhoods into, party central. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Darlene Walsh, and I don't like public speaking at all. And I live directly across the street from, I own 1450, what's my address? 1457 and 1467 Stockton. I want to address a few of the things. I am in support of their permit. And I think to deny them the permit would be proving them guilty before they even had a chance. I see when you talk about traffic, we all have pretty much 5 one-car driveways, and they have a capability of putting 4 cars in their driveway if they needed to. Traffic-wise, I too have lost pets over the years. I've lived here for 30 years, and I've lost them from people rushing to get their kids to school, and no one's paying attention. Parking is always going to be an issue on Stockton Street because it's a narrow street. You can only park on one side. I think that many people in this room have also used Airbnb and VRBOs, had the opportunity to stay in a neighborhood, experience the neighborhood. The charm for the people that I have seen over the 15 years that the people before them owned it, they like to walk downtown. They like to go to dinner. I would say there's probably been about 4 people who have rented over the past 17 years who now own property in St. Helena, and they do so because they had the opportunity to experience a day-to-day life in a residential neighborhood. I don't see that, not to be critical because I can completely understand, but I was sitting there with the feeling like that they were going to rent to ne'erly wells and drunkards and everything, and I hadn't seen that. I think that they do a very good job. When you talk about, I know all these people, I've only lived there 30 years. I know everyone else is born and raised in this town. Nobody likes change. We all know that. And we've made this ordinance to protect the rentals, to protect have something in place so that people don't have wild parties and don't rent. I mean, there was probably more complaints and noise when my teenage kids lived at home. And that was an everyday experience. From the time they bought this house, they've been up every Thursday to Sunday. So pretty much in this nice neighborhood, 5 days out of the week, we have a nice, quiet house. They're not asking to rent it out 365 days a year. And I think that they do a very good job. I think that they should be given an opportunity before they're criticized and not given the opportunity to do it. I'm willing to, I live across the street. I've for the last 17 years, 15 before them, helped the people if they have any, plumbing issues or whatever because they don't live here. I'm available. I'm home most of the time. Tyler and Mila only live an hour away, so they could be here if anything happened. I don't know what else to say except for I think that it should go through. I think that some of the reasons are hypothetical and they haven't been proven to be true. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Jeffrey Warren. I live at 1317 Allen Avenue. And I would also second everybody what they've said about Matt was an excellent ballettomane when he was a child and a great planning commissioner. We saw when you were playing, with our kids. It was very great. I know none of the facts of this case. I wouldn't comment on it, the facts. I want to talk a little bit about the ordinance and the way it's being enforced or could be enforced. I know in our own neighborhood, somebody applied for one of these short-term rentals, and Alan Galbeth, my next-door neighbor, before he was mayor, he took a petition around, and I think 61 or 69% of the people said they didn't want it, but it got passed, and I was just sort of curious. I don't know how many have to say they don't want it before it gets passed or whatever. But if you were to grant this, it seems to me that you really need to have something, and I'm a private property guy, so I think I'm very torn on this issue, and I don't like the tyranny of the majority either, because all the arguments we've heard today could be used really for almost just about any neighborhood in town. That being said, you probably couldn't come up with a worse street than this one or a worse size parcel or whatever. And it's time, I think, that you or whoever makes these decisions, one, you need to coordinate with the police. If you should grant it, you need to coordinate with the police and neighbors and have some complaining mechanism, and also have the landowners. And I don't know the landowners. I'm not against them by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure they're trying to do the right thing. But some mechanism where there's a hearing there, and you can decide, and you can take it away or fine them or do whatever the thing is. And this is for the ordinance in general. But on the health, safety, and welfare, and as Larry pointed out on the law on this thing, you can't be discriminatory. You can't discriminate against them. But you got to take some thought about where and what the location is. And if we're going to have 25 of these places, they really should be thought of what zone, if you will, or what area of in town where they take place. And this one looks very, very scary because of the width of the street, the traffic, the children's location, the animals, the whole bit that everybody's brought up. So if you do it, I'd like you to at least go further and have a complaining mechanism where it's really easy for people to either complain ahead of time or once something happens, and that gets adjudicated in a quick way. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also, I do have one bias here. I had a crush on Tona's sister Mary when we were in 7th grade.
I forgot just one last thing, and I don't know if it's as significant, but the conversation that I heard was it's not that it's not a nice neighborhood, it's not that it's not a warm and fuzzy neighborhood, but of the houses between Adams and Pine, 5 out of the 7 are rentals. So they do change every so often. It's not like everybody's lived there for their whole life and everybody knows everybody, because it does change. So I just wanted to point that part out too. So it is kind of a transitionary place too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Would anyone else like to speak? All right. I'm going to invite the applicant back up for their. Oh, okay. All right. I wouldn't want you to get in trouble.
Doug Lynn was my wife, Katie. What you've really got is a bunch of bullet points, and I'm not going to go over them again. You've heard them from just about everybody. But you've got safety, you've got traffic, you've got small lots, you've got no setbacks really to amount to anything. And the whole combination of them is just whatever the law is, that's the law. But in this neighborhood, this doesn't work. I mean, we live literally in each other's laps, and we get along fine, and we take care of one another. But to have a transit deal where you really have no control over it, obviously, for whatever reasons, the city hasn't really been on top of the problems that they've had. The police are not responding when they get a problem, and that's not our business here tonight. But to continue this, and in a small neighborhood, just doesn't make any sense at all. And I hope you'll decline it, and I hope in the future you'll take a very hard look at renewing some of the ones that you have. Is there a mechanism where you can revoke one?
Yes. I believe that Aaron went over the
Has
revoke.
that ever happened?
Not yet.
No, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Something for the future, but I hope you will decline this one.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, my crib notes. It's not, we can't have 8 people in our house. We have a 3-bedroom house, so we can have 6 people in our house, and our driveway holds 2 cars. We have never had any trouble finding a parking space in front of our house ever. We've never looked for parking, so I don't actually see that as a problem. I feel as if that's being put forth as a problem, but where our house is, there's actually no house that has Tona's house fronts Pine Street. So it's hard to explain, but if you look at it, there's actually the side of Tona's house next to ours. So there's all the way from our house to the corner for parking, and nobody has ever parked there. It's very empty. So I think parking is not an issue. I understand Tona's issue with a close setback between our bedrooms and her house. But in fact, you can't hear anything from our house through the walls. We've never heard a thing from any house from the inside of the house to our house, and I know nobody can hear from our house to theirs. And where the patio is outside is not a 2-foot setback. It's, if you look at the plan, there's actually many feet between where you sit outside, and for Doug and Katie's house, it's actually kind of the middle of their yard. It's not right next to their house. For Tona's house, there are many feet. So we do have noise rules for our guests. Nobody has ever broken them. And I think what our neighbors are not taking into account is that right now we do rent the house. It's rented because we need to in order to fund it. So we rent the house now, and our goal is to rent it half as much as we rent it now. So, in fact, we would be running it to half as many days, probably 4 to 6 weeks a year, whereas right now, part of the problem that we face is in order to find a great pool of renters who are willing to rent for over 31 days, and we're very picky about who rents our house. The person who's in there right now was the chief domestic policy advisor to a vice president. He's not having parties in our backyard. So in order to find that caliber of people, we have a very small pool of people to pick from who are willing to rent for 31 days. And sometimes they want to rent for more than 31 days. The people who are in there right now are there for 3 months. That is way more than we want to be out of our house. So we are very committed to the street. We're very committed to the neighborhood. We walk up and down and talk to everybody. So we want to be in the house, not out of the house. We don't want to run a commercial inn where people are in and out and having parties, and that has never happened. So for our neighbors on either side of us, there will actually be much less noise if we have a short-term permit than there might be now, where people are in there for 3 months at a time. Tyler, did you want to say anything? And we don't have any speakers outside, so there's no way to have music out there.
I get everybody's concerns, actually, that the commercial aspect of a street that's basically a residential street. When they paint that picture that it's a commercial, I think somebody said it's a motel. I didn't hear anybody say casino gambling, but, they were painting a picture. And in fact, we're talking about 6 to 8 weekends a year of people, quite often some of those people are people that we know or would expect to know, renting the place. So, and as far as noise, disorderly behavior, dangerous driving, I think that's an issue for the police. And if that ever happened, and I don't expect it to, I would expect that we would take some action, or there would be some police action. And in terms of the noise impact on the street, I think it's important to know that, we have no outside audio, or I don't even know what would be creating the noise. But if there was noise, people could contact us or contact Darlene. We would get up there right away and take care of it, because it's our neighborhood too. So we're not looking to change the character of the neighborhood with this at all.
Thank you.
All right.
Any questions? All right. And with that, I'm going to close the public comment and invite commission discussions. Commissioner Heil.
I defer. No, I'd like to hear from Commissioner Kissner-Monette first, if I could. Either one.
Well, sitting here listening to this and looking at the findings and stuff, I'm going to have to support this. I also have made a list that's probably got 20 items on it I think we need to look at in this ordinance. I understand what the neighbors are saying. I understand what the people that own the home are saying. I would find it very difficult. I'm finding it very difficult to make a decision, but I don't find anything in the findings. It's all speculation. There can be noise or there can't be noise. There can be crazy people running up and down the streets, or there can be sane people running up and down the streets. So I'm going to have to support the project. Or the permit, excuse me.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Kissner regarding, I have a list of things too for the ordinance. However, I have several findings that I don't think have been made. I think whenever you're looking at the findings, because you're trying to figure something out before it's actually happened, there is an element of speculation involved. But according to the ordinance, and we have to go by what can happen, not by what maybe is the plan of the owners at this point. But you can have up to 20 people at the house if you have a party, so that and you can have up to 8 people if you have 3 bedrooms. You can have 2 persons per bedroom plus 2. So, maybe that would never happen, but that can happen, and we have to look at this in terms of what can happen according to the ordinance. And you can have up to 20, so if you had 8 people, you could invite 12 additional people for a party. And that involves a lot more cars than 4, potentially. And the noise has already been established as being a problem. That one of the neighbors has said that when there are renters there, they have to close the windows when it's in the summer and put on the fan because of noise that's coming from there. So, it already has been a problem, and I'm assuming that noise is not there when the owners are living there. I don't know. Number 4, if we're going to look at this in terms of the onus being on the neighbors to complain, to take care of issues, it could very well be put excessive demands on our police department. We just had our police chief resign in order to keep 2 officers that are needed, and I don't think we have a lot of extra manpower in the police department. So I can't, the finding number 4, I can't make either. The narrow street ingress and egress may not be adequate to ensure public safety and noise concerns. From all the testimony, I don't see how that finding can be made. I can go on. Let's see. It appears to me from what people are saying for finding number 7 that this neighborhood appears to be incompatible. I mean, that a short-term rental appears to be incompatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And at number 9, I'm sorry, it's a public safety issue. With potentially a lot more cars that could be, I can't make that finding, especially because of the narrowness of the street and parking only on one side. And there's another one too. Let's see. The cumulative effects, I think, for the neighborhood businesses, if we approve this with such a lot of pushback from the neighborhood and so many points unresolved, that I feel that those findings can't be met. So I got 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12 that couldn't be met. And I would also like to ask, before we take any action on this, I think there's been enough controversial testimony. I don't know if anyone else feels this, but should there be an investigation with respect to past illegal weekend rentals? I mean, we've heard several things. I don't know that it would be, how difficult that would be to do, but it seems to me that's very important to clear up before even considering taking a vote on this application, to me. And, yeah. Okay. So
Thank you, Bobby.
That's what I know.
Well, I appreciate both of your comments and both of your sentiments completely. And I thank the applicants for, I think thoughtfully and laying out what I think they view as, their best of intentions. I think a speaker said, that we're, in a certain sense, we think they have the best of intentions, but the ramifications of opening this up as a short-term rental means you lose an element of control with regards to who you can screen to rent it. And it, as one of the commissioners who voted in favor of the ordinance and in our original codification of the ordinance, and then having sat here in the commission for the first 2 years of it, certainly we're at a point where we need to take inventory, we need to take stock across the board with regards to this ordinance. One thing I really struggled with when we codified this ordinance was, what are the appropriate zones if we are going to legalize this and we are going to kind of allow it? You almost would want to grab the map of the city, of St. Helena. We are planning commissioners of all. We should love maps. and look at the different land use designations and look at the different zones and where does this make sense and where doesn't it make sense. And of course, we wind up with, as charming and as diverse as our community is, you wind up with not a really easy way to slice and dice this, pizza. It kind of, maybe it works at the end of Fulton Lane. It's the land use designation there is ag, or it works at the end of Pratt Avenue as I look at this map. Maybe it works on Pratt Avenue closer to Main Street, which is within the urban limit line. That's in a medium density residential district, or maybe it's low density residential. And you wind up with this situation where I guess at the end of the day it actually winds up needing to be case by case, and you need to make the findings. There's that threshold where it does make sense, and hear the evidence. And I'm hearing what you're talking about. We have to look at this in terms of what could be the potential impacts. I think this notion that it could be rented out for 8, and then the possibility for 20 is valid, even if that isn't the intention of the permit holder, from time and eternity. I also agree with Mr. Warren's comments about, typically and I think other commissioners know this about me. I tend to be, in favor of property rights, and if this is codified, then, at what threshold of neighborhood complaints do we then say, okay, well, fine, I guess there's outcry, and we're going to go with the tyranny of the majority, as Mr. Warren was pointing out. But I think I remember on the Tainter Street application, there was a similar concern. Tainter Street being narrow, Tainter Street being you can really only park on one side. And unfortunately, was absent that meeting, one of only 3 meetings in 5.5 years that I missed. But there seemed to be some similar issues and similar concerns. Narrow parcels, in that case shallow lots, in this case maybe deeper lots that are almost in this very rectangular shape. The impacts, as we've heard from the testimony, could be there with regards to the ability to park the cars in tandem. I know from Valley View on our street and in my driveway, we're in a tandem situation, and it's dangerous just from the perspective of pulling in and out of those situations when you need to, as my father always says, back in, front out. But you're not going to be able to, to kind of enforce that in a short-term type environment where, you must back in your car to a tandem parking. So it really strikes me that this, and as one of the people who was an advocate for the short-term rental ordinance, because we had so much illegal activity going on, we felt like we needed to codify it, we needed to enforce it, we needed to have rules and regulations for it, and we needed to somehow find a benefit. It also, to your point, Mrs. Coy, it's in a certain sense sad. It's sad that our neighborhoods aren't full of full-timers. I mean, it's amazing to hear this testimony of how tight-knit your neighborhood is, and I think that you're wanting to be welcoming on both sides, and respectful of both sides of this argument, but by the same time, so many of our neighborhoods are being converted to second homes that sit empty 80% of the time or 90% of the time, and that certainly isn't good for the fabric of our community. And there's no essentially very little benefit, to the actual community with regards to sales tax and everything else, with absentee ownership essentially. So. I'm having trouble making some of these findings with regards to the it's the public safety one, the public health and safety on that narrow strip. I think as Mr. Hyde pointed out, if there ever is a place where it doesn't make sense, I think this little corner of St. Helena, you can just looking at the density of the houses, how close they are, the parking on one street. Commissioner Russell used to live across the street. And, whenever I would go to dinner at his house, which was only a few times, it was a difficult thing. And crossing the street with children, it's just not an ideal place for this use. And I don't think that I'm having trouble making the findings. And I think that the applicants are doing this in good faith. I think that their notion that they want to rent it, for shorter periods of time is something that we considered when we looked at the ordinance. This is a way for the city to actually have some benefit, in the cost-benefit analysis without having people skirting the rules. So, that's where I am on this. I'm going to have trouble being able to approve this.
I agree with you, Commissioner Heil. Definitely on points 2, 4, 7, 9, and 12. I have a real problem with the street safety, knowing that street's so narrow. issue with the parking, noise, the city resources. Our police department's already so strained, and to have we're going to have to ask them for more cross-referencing on noise calls and violations and complaints so that we can, going forward, as part of the revisions. And again, because of the setbacks and the small lots, I can't find those findings and be in support of the short-term rental. And I'm going to keep that really short and sweet and ask for a motion.
Well, I'd like to say one more thing. I was at all the meetings when this ordinance was being created and voted on. And as I recall, there was controversy then, and it was looked at as something that time would inform the governing bodies of the town as to where to go after a while. It was reviewed after a year. It's supposed to be reviewed again. After the first year, there was no one reported any complaints. I mean, there may have been, but there was no record of any complaints. I think it's really important that it was set up in a way that we can inform. You can inform the city council, you can inform us when we're working on this ordinance, because it's coming up and it is going to be agendized and worked on. And I urge you to come to the meetings when that happens so that you can share your experience, because that's how it was set up to happen.
Thank you for that, Bobby. Yes, it was kind of an experiment to kind of work out the kinks.
Well, I happened to be here when we voted on it.
Exactly.
Matthew
Same.
and I both were. And I have regretted many times that I voted on it. But I also feel if the ordinance stands the way it is, and in order to be fair to the applicants, that I have to vote for it. That's.
And I mean, I would feel the same. I would feel the same way, but because, for instance, the enforcement. I mean, it's codified, and we went to we said it has to have teeth, $1,000 per diem in fine. I mean, Larry spoke eloquently about that. If we're a nation of laws, we need to live by our laws and enforce them. And if they're unenforceable, then we wind up with lawlessness. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, even though I'm moving far away, that it's got to stop in St. Helena and in Napa County. I mean, that some of these things, that the hammer needs to drop, the shoe needs to drop. So with that said, I think that one consideration that we codified was the specific effects of the neighborhood, and whether the
That's one of the things I have on my list to discuss.
Right. And from my perspective, it really comes down to the parking, the ingress, the egress, and the street safety for this specific parcel. Everything else aside, the issues with the problem, with the problems with people on Main Street who are renting and trashing the place or being disrespectful. I mean, I think those are global, and those can be looked at in the in the general overarching ordinance discussion. But on this specific application, I feel like we cannot make those few findings that we need to make for this parcel.
Yeah, I agree. Again, with I just think that the street safety is the biggest thing for me. I just don't think that it's an appropriate street to have a short-term rental. I know that there is one that's south on this street, but that was also one that didn't come before the Planning Commission to be able to voice that opinion. That was one that just was approved because not enough neighbors spoke up. So,
is there anyone else besides me who thinks that an investigation should happen just to clear up the controversy that's been raised at this public hearing?
Well, I mean, I think certainly we should, rather than single this application out, I think it could be taken in the context of enforcement across the board. I would venture to guess, and I mean, there could be some forensic fact finding, but it would really make sense, I think. I mean, obviously, if we were going to approve this, I think you would have to have that burden of proof and that threshold. I mean, if they're violating the provision of the ordinance or giving us false or misleading information at the time of the application, I mean, those are reasons for revocation right away. And I think in that instance, if we were to approve, you would do that research, and then obviously would have to revoke it right away if they bear it out to be true. But if we're not issuing the permit in this case, I think that could fall under the umbrella of enforcement generally, and that the staff could be tasked with looking at all violations across the city. I'm sure this isn't the only questionable parcel that's been listed on vacation rentals by owner or some other service.
As you say it to the,
I understand that, but
I take screenshots of the Airbnb people who.
So I think that I don't think it makes sense for the commission at this point to have a continuance if these existing conditions still exist,
No, I'm
where
not
it doesn't make
asking for a
sense for it to ever
continuance.
have a.
I'm not thinking about a continuance. I'm just saying that I think this is the only one that I know about that that's on the public record. For there is a discrepancy on public record about. Okay, I mean, I'm not saying that you're guilty or innocent. All I'm saying is there.
Oh, okay,
No,
all right,
no,
hey. Please, thank you.
Then
That
let
was
me-
fun. Anyway, Bobby,
Please let me finish. I really do not mean to say that. All I was asking is because the controversy came up on public record, is there any obligation that we have to, okay, that's.
Thank you. All right. Do we have a motion?
Well, I would move that the Planning Commission, that we deny the application after considering the effects of the proposed use would have on the surrounding uses and the cumulative impacts within the community. And we would adopt the resolution of denial that is attached in our packet.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Heil?
Yes.
Monette?
Yes.
Kistner?
No.
Chair Parker?
Yes. Thank you so much for your time. Can someone grab Commissioner Sweeney? And actually, we're going to take a 5-minute recess and come back at... All right, we're going to bring the meeting back to order. And we're going to move to item number 8. This is the fiscal year 2015-16 capital improvement plan. Just verify if it's I can speak in conformance with the general plan. If we could have staff report.
Public Works Director Palmer will give the presentation.
Thank you. Yes, this item is the capital improvement plan for 2015-2020, and the issue before the Planning Commission is simply to find that it's in conformance with the general plan, which is a requirement of the government code. So, clicking through some slides real quick. I did put together a quick overview just for the Commission's education. It's a 5-year planning document, the goal of which is to maintain and improve the city infrastructure. This current 5-year plan includes $15.2 million programmed over 5 years. And the plan is divided into 4 categories: civic, streets, wastewater, and water. Also, I'd like to note that I'll click the next slide first. That even though I have program funding for 5 years, it's actually only budgeted for the first year. So we budget 1 year at a time. I planned 5 years, and then we bring this back annually to the City Council and Planning Commission to approve the budget each year. So you can see there in the first year there's $6.8 million programmed, and then for a 5-year total of $15.2. Again, we're here tonight to find, consistent with general plan, those are the government code sections that require this. All the proposed CIP projects are to maintain and rehabilitate existing infrastructure. So there's no increased capacity. We're not dealing with new roads or extending services outside the existing service boundaries or anything like that. These projects are strictly maintenance rehabilitation type projects. There's one minor exception. That is a new project to construct a city-owned restroom off of Money Way. And the general plan policies this is implementing or in conformance with is Tourism Management Guiding Policy 3.4.2, 3.4.7, which are copied there. Basically just supporting development of visitor serving components and encouraging alternate modes of travel. I've also put together a table. This is in the staff report as well. I just thought I'd put on some slides here with each project in the CIP in the 5-year program, and then referencing the general plan policy that's consistent with. I don't really plan on walking through those, but if you see one you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to do that. So these are the civic projects. There's a downtown restroom project at the bottom. That's a new project. These are the roadway projects. There's actually 2 slides of those. They're all pavement rehab, curb and sidewalk, and gutter repair, a bike lane on an existing street, a couple gap sidewalk projects. These are the wastewater projects. mainly they are improvements to the existing facility, at the existing plant. So these are not, I don't think there's any, no, there's no projects that are related to collection system. It's all at the plant, upgrading the plant and keeping the plant properly maintained. And then the water projects. The most, I guess I don't know I'm losing my thought here, but the most, the highest kind of profile project is the top one, the Upper York Creek Ecosystem Restoration Project, which we just adopted the EIR for about a month ago, maybe in April, May timeframe.
I do have a question for you,
Sure.
and I don't know if Noah passed it along to you. How much of the water rate hike increases that were passed a few years ago, how much of that is budgeted to all of these improvements, and how much has been spent so far?
Right.
It was a significant hike.
Right. I did put down some notes on that. Let me find those. So, of the hike, which I'm looking at the study, it looks like it was about over think about the 5-year window that was presented there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years that were presented in the financial plan. There was $34 million total. About $10.4 million of that was for projects. So roughly a third of the hike for water projects was related to capital projects, but it's interesting, it did leave 10% of the projects unfunded. So even though it funded $10.4 million for capital projects, there was still $1.4 million roughly that was allocated as, well, it's unfunded this time. We know these projects need to be done, but we're not going to fund them 100%. And so of the projects that were completed, $2 million, the Tank 1A project, we just did the tank replacement, that was over $2 million, I think around 2.1. And then there's still $3 million programmed from that rate study for the Upper York Creek Ecosystem Restoration Project. That's actually being funded through bond funds, but bond payments are included in the rate analysis. And then in the CIP document itself, there is a list of projects at the back in the Appendix A, which lists projects that were completed. And so looking down that list, I did talk about Tank 1A construction. That was a significant project. The other significant one on there would be the Pratt Avenue Transmission Bridge, and the top project, that Bale Slough Rutherford pipeline. I don't have the project costs on that, but it was a pretty significant piece of pipeline down there at the connection to the City of Napa water supply in Rutherford. So that's it. If the commission finds these are consistent with the general plans in accordance with staff recommendations, the next step would go back to City Council on June 23rd, the next meeting, for final adoption in conjunction with the budget. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you mean that the bathrooms were an exception to the general plan? What did you mean?
No, it was just in the staff report of my presentation, I'm saying everything is a maintenance and rehabilitation project except the bathrooms. That's not an exception. The general plan is just an exception to the whole. Every other project, and there's basically a maintenance and rehab project, except that is one new facility that hasn't been planned for.
Steve, the unfunded portion of the water, is that because they didn't raise the rates again, like they said they were going to? I believe the water plan called for rate increases every so often.
Yeah, the rate study it does show the 58% increase in the first year, and then 3% subsequent years. I think the 1.4 million to 10% unfunded was this policy decision that was made when the study was adopted. So I wouldn't say that it's because the rates were not increased in accordance with the study. They were, just the study was, they estimated a total cost with the master plan, and there was a policy decision that, well, we're not going to fund all of that with this study. We'll make sure we come back and update it later. And there is a statement in the study about making sure that the rates are reviewed every 3 to 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think just one further point of clarification, Steve. Essentially the water, wastewater, and civic improvements. Well, actually, all of these improvements are funded from the impact funds, right? I mean, they're separate from the general fund, is what I'm trying to say. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because I think it's funny when you see $15.8 million in projects over the next 5 years.
Well, let me just clarify. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to clarify. So civic projects are 100% general fund.
100% general fund. Okay.
And then streets has gas tax primarily as the funding source, and then in the later years, they're 18, 19, 19, 20. The Measure A or Measure T kicks in for transportation sales tax measure. Wastewater and water are like 90% funded through the rates, and then there are small contributions by impact fees to all of those except civic at this point in that plan.
I just think to a common lay citizen to see $15.8 million after they just got a report that we're completely flat broke and had to cut $800,000 out of the next year's budget, it's because of their essentially their separate funds.
They can't draw from
funding
they cannot
separate
draw from
funding
one another.
sources, right?
Yeah.
But for clarification, I mean, we don't want to underestimate $1 million up there is general fund, correct? I mean, the civic.
It's $668,000 is funded through general fund.
Because the streets aren't entirely.
No, the civic.
For the budget we're talking about, it's 55.
Right. No, I'm talking about the fiscal year this year. I understand
No.
the 5-year implication, but in this year's, we're talking 588 will be, that civic, that is money in this year's budget.
Yes.
General fund.
General fund, yes.
And to clarify for me on the streets, is none of those dollars are pulled from general fund? Because I was under the impression they were based on some of the
Let me.
budget
I have more slides in here
Oh.
for my council presentation. I didn't want to get too much detail.
I'm sorry to even ask the question because it's not our purview.
No, we're getting a little bit off, but I'm happy to answer the question for educational purposes. Let's see. So let's see if I've got it in here. Well, there's streets funding. So
there's grants
not in 15-16. There's no general fund funding. There's grants. In the 5-year program, I do include that in the out years in 18, 19, 19, 20. And the reason is that with the Measure T, when that comes in, that sales tax, there's a maintenance effort requirement that the city maintain the level of funding that it had for street maintenance in certain years. And the agreement specifies, I believe it's 7, 8, and 9, 2007, 2008, 2009, that whatever we spent those 3 years out of general fund and gas tax on street maintenance, we have to continue spending that when Measure T kicks in. It's they don't want you to supplant those funds. You have to continue. It's supposed because Measure T is supposed to
You have
enhance
a certain amount in the pie. Got
yeah,
it.
it's supposed to enhance the amount of maintenance you're doing, not supplant existing funds. Yep.
Thank you.
But if the question is, are these items consistent with the general plan? Yes.
Yes.
Well, I would move that we adopt the attached resolution determining that the fiscal year 2015-16 of the 2015-2020 capital improvement plan is in conformance with the general plan.
Second.
Commissioner Heil?
Yes.
Manette?
Yes.
Kistner?
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Chair Parker?
Yes. All right, I added a number 9. It's not really, it's an agenda item, but if you are at all interested in becoming our next planning commissioner and taking Commissioner Heil's spot, please submit your applications to our wonderful city clerk. Would you like to provide your email address? Or deadline?
So deadline is next Friday, and it's going to be agendized for the first meeting in July. And just a little side note, we also have quite a few other boards and committees. Vacancies, thank you. Sustainability has 4 positions. Active Transportation has 4 positions. Library Board has 3 positions. Parks and Recreation has 1 position. Tree Committee has 6 positions. Multicultural has 2 positions. And Mosquito Abatement has 1 position. So my email address is cindyb@cityofsthelena.org. You can also visit the website and download an application. So as the sitting board, if you could help and get the feelers out there and just promote people to apply and get involved. I sure appreciate it. And by the way, I missed you guys, and I'm so sorry, Commissioner Heil. If we can't get a replacement, I guess that means you're going to have to stay in the seat.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah, I
guys.
have to talk to Joan
And
about
with
that.
that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much, and thank you, Commissioner Heil.